Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Each month we extend happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee, anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This, as ever, is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse Film Discussion Group. And hey, if you have just discovered our program, welcome. If you're a regular listener, we are, of course, thrilled that you're back. Don't come more epic or universally loved than Seven Samurai, the classic Japanese film directed by Akira Kurosawa and released 70 years ago this month by Toho Studios. The setup is straightforward but potent. You've got a small farming village that enlists a handful of samurai to defend it from bandits who return every harvest to steal their crops. The samurai, each with their unique skills and personalities, train the peasants and prepare them for the impending attack. But it's the visual execution of this narrative, coupled with several unforgettable performances and woven with thought-provoking subtexts, that elevates Seven Samurai to the highest ranks of world cinema. Befitting of a 207-minute film, which represents the longest runtime of any movie we've covered in our Cineversary podcast thus far, this episode promises to be an epic in itself. That's because we have two distinguished guests joining us this month. Consider them cinema samurai of the highest skill. Up first will be an in-depth interview with David Desser, one of the foremost authorities on Asian films. Then we'll hear from Stuart Galbraith IV, a widely followed cinema historian, film critic, and essayist who actually lives in Japan and has written several books on Japanese cinema. Yep, there's plenty of great discussion and analyses ahead as we commemorate 7 decades of one of the finest films ever made. But let's get further immersed in the milieu and making of Seven Samurai before greeting this month's visitors, shall we, by taking a walk down Wikipedia Lane. Seven Samurai is a 1954 Japanese epic samurai action film co-written, edited, and directed by Akira Kurosawa. Taking place in 1586 in the Sengoku period of Japanese history, the film stars Toshiro Mifune as Kikuchiyo, Takashi Shimura as Kambai Shimada, Yoshia Inaba as Gorabai, Daisuke Kato as Shishiroji, Seiji Miyaguchi as Kyotso, Minoru Chiaki as Heihachi, and Isao Kimura as Katsushiro. At the time, Seven Samurai was the most expensive film yet made in Japan. It took a year to shoot, and it faced numerous difficulties. It was eventually released in Japan on April 26, 1954, and became the second highest grossing domestic movie in the country that year. Taking a closer look at the Sight and Sound polls across the decades, Seven Samurai has ranked number 3 in the 1982 Critics Poll, number 9 in the 1992 and 2002 Directors Polls, number 17 in the 2012 Critics Poll, and number 20 in the 2022 Critics Poll. Japan's oldest film magazine, Kinema Junpo, voted it the best Japanese film ever made in 2009 and in 1999. It also earns the top slot in the 2018 BBC Culture Poll of the 100 greatest foreign language films, and it placed tops in Empire magazine's 100 best films of world cinema in 2010. Seven Samurai gets a perfect 100% fresh score at Rotten Tomatoes, where its average critical score is also near perfect, 9.6 out of 10, and its audience score is 97%. At Metacritic.com, its Metascore is 98 out of 100. Alrighty, so much to do this month, so let's cut to the chase and kick things off here with our first chat. Heads up that this is a lengthy dialogue ahead, but well worth listening to if you want to better understand what makes Seven Samurai a virtually flawless film. So let's hit the go button. Time to shine the spotlight on David Desser. Let's give it up now for David Desser, Emeritus Professor of Cinema Studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, co-editor of the Journal of Japanese and Korean Cinema, and one of the world's foremost experts on Asian cinema, including the films of Akira Kurosawa, as evidenced by his shared commentary track on the Criterion Collection edition of Seven Samurai. Now, David appeared on our show last November, so it wasn't that long ago, and he was here to discuss the 70th anniversary of Tokyo Story back in episode 64, so check that one out. Hello, David. How are you today?
I'm just fine, thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's wonderful to hear your voice again, and I feel so lucky that I get a chance to tap your brain, another Asian masterwork here. Boy, you ask me, and I will tell you that this is not only my favorite foreign film, work of world cinema, I think it's Kurosawa's best film, and I consider it the best Japanese movie ever made. When did you first view Seven Samurai? Do you recall? And what was your initial opinion of the film?
I do recall I saw it on television back in the later, not quite very late, but in the later 1960s on a television series hosted by LA Times critic Charles Champlin.
Okay.
And he would introduce the film, show the movie, and then typically interview somebody afterward.
Folks, this is not Charles Chaplin, it's Champlin.
That's right. Very good.
So younger generations might get confused about
No,
that.
they would. But I remember it. I was in high school. It was the short version. There's a 160-minute version floating around, which is actually the version that won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival in 1956. And I'm going to say that it was the first Japanese movie I saw that wasn't a dubbed monster movie.
Okay.
It's possible. I remember I saw a couple of Japanese movies that had become cult movies in the movie theater when I was in high school, and that was Rashomon and Woman in the Dunes.
Ah.
They were cult movies, like midnight movies kind of thing. Of course, at that point, when I was in high school, there was a theater in New York, in Manhattan, I'm from Brooklyn, called the Bijou. And the Bijou showed Japanese movies. And when I started to go to the Bijou, they were showing samurai movies. So I got into both serious Japanese cinema by Seven Samurai and also other samurai movies, which I could fortunately see on the big screen in Manhattan's once famous Bijou Theater. So that I remember it very well.
That's a pretty cool story because a lot of scholars, I'll ask this question, and often they'll say they got introduced to that month's work by, virtue of, film class or film studies in college. But in your case, you were actually seeking this stuff out in your childhood.
Yes, and I was fortunate that PBS at that time, they did world cinema.
Now, you are a huge fan of Asian cinema, and you've written extensively, taught extensively about it. Is this a pivotal film in that passion of yours that was incited or spiked? I mean, to what extent can you credit a Seven Samurai with inspiring you to your profession?
I would say it's quite foundational, except that as late as graduate school, I was still interested in filmmaking. But realizing I had no talent, I switched over to film studies, and at that time minored in Japanese. So I had been a Japanese film fan at that point for 6 years, also a Hong Kong film fan. So yes, it was very central.
I'll bet. So, Seven Samurai proved to be Akira Kurosawa's most popular and his longest work. But for you, where does it rank in Kurosawa's filmography and also among the treasured works of Japanese cinema?
Not only have I changed my appraisal, but if I were forced to pick the greatest film of all time, I would pick Seven Samurai.
That is high praise, sir.
It is. I think the only reason it doesn't get quite as much respect, not that it doesn't get respect, there's nobody that doesn't think it's a great movie, but maybe it doesn't get the respect that I think it deserves is because of the lack of important women characters. So in a sense, of course, there is the character of Shino who's important, but it's a man's movie. It's a movie about men. It's about manhood. It's about masculinity. It's about men at war.
And of course, coming from a John Ford Western template, if you will, a lot of those older Westerns weren't female centric either. I mean, it's the context of the times, right? Like, for unfortunately, maybe in the prism of 2024, looking back on a 1954 film, the women are going to get short shrift. That's unfortunate, but in its time, it was accepted and it was kind of understood.
Yeah, I don't think people dislike it, or complain about it, but I think it doesn't quite move up to the top just because of that. That's all. I'm not even saying that, for better or for worse. I mean, Kurosawa's not a director of women. I mean, he only made one film that has an important woman character who is the heroine.
Is it the Lady Macbeth-like character in Throne of Blood?
But she's important, but she's a bad guy.
That's true.
The one that's a good guy is actually a 1946 movie called No Regrets for Our Youth.
I never saw it. Okay.
But it's all right. It's all right. But the otherwise, the women characters that are memorable tend to be negative. I was doing air quotes, which you can't see. But yeah, they tend to be powerful and certainly compelling. The Lady Macbeth character is probably one of the two most memorable of Kurosawa's villains of the female persuasion. The other being Lady Kaede in Ram. She's she's really great. She's my favorite character in Ram.
Yeah, that's a good one. Forgot about her. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but as I say, he's a director. He's a director of men, and that's just the way it is. But as I say, yeah, and the people who really admire Seven Samurai are other filmmakers.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So if I said it was the greatest film ever made, I could also say it's one of the, if not, it's hard to say the, but it's certainly one of the most influential. So there's a lot of Japanese films that I love, but I'm going to go with Seven Samurai as my favorite.
I'm with you.
I'm going to go with the greatest film ever made. Although, it's a tough call because there's a lot of great movies.
Oh, sure.
But, if you have to pick one, that's my pick.
Yep, it's a good desert island disc, absolutely. So
Well, it's a great one.
I can't argue with you. Can't argue with you. And the infinite rewatchability factor plays into it too. Yeah.
Kurosawa's stature is so high that people could point to any number of films, though they would never not point to Seven Samurai. Now, when you say it was his most popular film, it probably is now. But in terms of the box office over the course of his career, believe it or not, because I don't think it's a great film, but the one that is his most popular is Hidden Fortress, The Hidden Fortress, famous mostly for George Lucas being inspired by it for some of the characters and setting of Star Wars.
That's right.
So Hidden Fortress, yeah, it was a huge hit. Now, Seven Samurai was a hit, but it was up until that time, 1954, when it was released, it was the most expensive Japanese film ever made. Now, it doesn't necessarily look that expensive, but he went out on location and just spent a very, very long time on it. In fact, 1953 is the only year in the 50s that Kurosawa didn't release a film. 52, he released the masterpiece Ikiru, and then in 54, he released Seven Samurai. In 1953, he was out on location shooting the film. It was very, very expensive. It did well, but you got to watch your budget to get your return.
Yeah, this is true.
But it was very popular, and it was respected. Interestingly, in the most important of the awards, Kinema Jumpo, it took number 3, which is fine, but numbers 1 and 2 were taken by a director named Keisuke Kinoshita, who happens to be the director I'm working on a book right now.
Oh, wow. Small world.
It's kind of funny. And Kinoshita's, it's probably for Japanese fans, this film by Kinoshita, number 1, is called 24 Eyes. Very, very famous. It couldn't be any different than Seven Samurai.
Now, I was reading that Kinema Jumpo, they voted Seven Samurai the best Japanese film ever in 2009 and 1999. So I think it did earn the top slot eventually.
Yes, they changed their minds over the years. Some of the films that they gave high ranking don't even show up in their top 100.
So what year were you talking about where it took third place?
54, the year it was released.
Gotcha.
Now, remember, Kurosawa had a lot of trouble with the studios. So he had tried to release his version of The Idiot in 1951 in a 4-hour version, and the studio wanted no part of that. So when Seven Samurai came out in his idea at a 3.5 hour version,
Yeah.
the studio then cut it to 160 minutes. They took out an hour and they sent it overseas. Now, not only did it take the Silver Lion at Venice, but it also played commercially in the US.
Now, this is important to keep in mind, listener, that 1954, I don't care what side of the Atlantic you're on, or the Pacific for that matter,
Yeah.
you know, a 3.5 hour movie just isn't going to cut it. Like the studios would be very,
Nah,
nervous about that. And normally the runtime on a given, let's say, Hollywood film or even foreign film, a lot of films from overseas, were typically 90 minutes or so.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It was still the case that theaters wanted to get in as many shows as they could.
Mm-hmm. Turn over that audience. Yep.
So the 160-minute version was the best they could do.
Now, what's great is that the 207, I think it is, minute version that exists today on the Criterion Collection and elsewhere. I don't even know if you could find the truncated version anymore. That's probably a good thing, although I'm sure you've done your compare and contrast and could probably tell our listeners that there's no comparison. The full 3.5 hour version is the one you want to see.
Oh, yes. The only way you could find a 160-minute version is if you got somehow a 16 millimeter print that, so-called film collectors. But that was the version that Janus Films had released back in the day in the 70s and 80s when college courses and college film societies would rent for pretty little money, depending on the film. But anyway, they'd rent these movies in 16 millimeter, and that was the version that the Janus Films had. So there was no long version until much more recently.
Yeah, I think it was 2003 or the early 2000s that they finally pieced together the long cut.
Yeah, finally, DVD and maybe VHS. But that's a long film. So
Right.
there's no way. But what's amazing is I've seen it on the screen at festivals or once or twice, just commercially. It goes by so fast.
Totally.
I mean, I know it really, really well. I know it really well. So the more you know a film, the faster it goes. But still, I mean, it really does zip by.
I totally agree with you. This most recent rewatch, that was my biggest impression. Was I've seen it so many times, but this time I'm paying a little more attention to just thinking objectively about it and like how a first timer might consider it. Let's say I refer it to a friend or a colleague. I mean, we're more patient today because a lot of filmmakers make very long works. You think of Oppenheimer, for example, or even some of these superhero movies. They're pushing 3 hours plus.
They are.
And people are more tolerant of long form content online, streaming, etc. But still, 3.5 hours, is it going to play today, especially a foreign movie? And again, I can't put myself in the shoes of someone else. I can only answer for myself. But kind of thinking back, like if I had seen this for the first time, completely agree. It went by so quickly, and I wanted it to keep going. I wanted there to be extra scenes that I'd never discovered before. Just imagining, like, wow, what if there's some extra lost cut of a few reels that they found unearthed somewhere? Wouldn't that be a treasure trove?
That would be incredible. Although, I mean, the film is really perfect.
Yes.
The 100. What's amazing though is when you see if you see the 160-minute version as your first viewing, you would not think, as I didn't, that there was anything missing. Now, whether that's a tribute to the studio and their cutting, or a tribute to Kurosawa's storytelling, that's so engaging that it's difficult to tell. But there's no question that the 3.5 hour version is just really perfect.
Why is Seven Samurai worthy of commemoration? It's 70 years now, so 7 decades onward. How and why does it remain a timeless classic? Let's dig deeper here for the listener and kind of parse out what makes it so great.
Well, I think it's that great combination that all great films have, which is it is amazingly put together, and what it's about is timeless. And it's about what does it mean to be a good guy, to be a hero, to do right, to distinguish right from wrong, to put your life on the line for others, and to be a part of a future that's going to be worth living. So I think thematically, it's incredible. Structurally, it has this wonderful elegance of people are in need of help. They go find help. They find one guy who's willing to help. then he has to gather a bunch of other guys, and then they go help.
That could be the most fascinating aspect of the movie. The battle sequences are excellent,
Oh,
but
yeah, right.
the gathering of the heroes, to me, is so deliciously fun.
It is. It is. And, the relation, of course, and then as a kind of extra whipped cream on top, all of the samurai have distinct characteristics.
Yes.
They have wonderful interaction. The interaction that they end up having with the villagers when they get to the village, it develops. So that's why the 3.5 hour version is better than the 160-minute version, which doesn't take out any of the action. But all of those things of subtlety in the relationships and the developing of character and, changing people's minds, the samurai who feel superior to the farmers, and the farmers who fear the samurai. I mean, there's a real meeting of the minds.
No question. Wonderful build-up. Now, talk about character development. You
Yeah.
have the luxury of the first 90 minutes plus just rolling out one character after another.
Yes, it's
and kind of introducing to the villagers. And we haven't even gotten into any real action. I mean, other than the master swordsman kind of duel,
Yes,
in which
that's
he
right.
proves his prowess.
Yeah.
A couple of beats, but really we haven't even gotten to the main event, which is the showdown with the bandits, which comes really in the last 40 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
So that first half, boy, just the luxury and the flexibility with which to usher in these characters one at a time is beautiful.
And that's why the long version is so important. It takes its time, and it has really revealing moments about the hard life of the farmers. We all want to be samurai, but if we think about it, in essence, we're really farmers, most of us. In terms of our relationship to power and the ability to make change in our life.
Yes.
And again, you have the seven samurai, but there's also a handful of farmers who are given characterization.
Oh, sure. And that's important.
Yeah, that's absolutely important. And then the third thing, you have your theme, you have your structure. And then the third thing, of course, is Kurosawa's style.
Yes.
He is the master at every aspect. See, the reason I think Kurosawa may be the greatest filmmaker of all time is he has the ability to do every aspect of film. That is, he's a great director of the camera. He's a great director of editing. In fact, if you look at Kurosawa's movies, the credits, there is no credit for editing.
I never really paid attention. Wow.
That's right. Now, he had co-screenwriters. He had a couple of friends, and they would go off to an inn, drink a sufficient amount of sake or liquor, and write the script. Normally, the idea or the adaptation idea was Kurosawa's, but he had at least 2 or 3 guys that he worked with. So I imagine, and then, of course, Kurosawa was very famous for his storyboards. He was an artist. An easel artist. That was his training. And his storyboards are sometimes works of art in themselves.
So talk about multifaceted and wearing many hats. Not only did he direct the film, but he also was crucial in terms of camera placement, camera movement. You talked about his role in the editing, which was absolutely essential.
Yep.
Obviously a co-screenwriter on most, if not all of his works.
Oh.
There you go. And of course, didn't he co-produce many of his films himself too?
Well, by the time his films got very expensive, he formed his own company. And he and Toho, the studio that he distributed with for the bulk of his great career, the 50s and 60s masterpieces. But when he got kind of expensive, he co-produced and co-financed, and Toho would put in 50% of the budget. And then, of course, they had tremendous distribution. So Kurosawa didn't want to leave Toho. Young filmmakers in the 60s were distributing outside of the mainstream distributors, but Kurosawa was still a company man, but he had complete control.
That's important.
Yeah, and but every aspect, he even used just a couple of different guys. That's all for the music, cinematography, and of course his cast.
Mm-hmm.
He had the advantage of having Toshiro Mifune and Takashi Shimura, and then in the early 60s he had Tatsuya Nakadai, who after he and Mifune parted, he then made the last of his big budget films were with Nakadai, Kagemusha, and Ran. So, he had his, and of course, actually interestingly, I said women weren't that important, but he worked with the same actress. She had small roles, but the same actress, Kyoko Kagawa, is also in probably 10 of his movies.
Yeah, I mean, he had his own stock company, kind of like John Ford did, or Preston Sturges, or some of these great filmmakers,
Exactly.
where he would kind of interchange different faces for different roles. But you saw a lot of the same faces in
Oh yeah, and
Kurosawa
even
films.
some of the lesser actors who had great
That's
faces.
especially what I'm talking about.
Yeah, who had great little guys. Yeah.
Little roles like Yohai. Who's the actor who plays Yohai? I
Oh,
mean,
I don't remember, but he's a regular. He's a
yeah,
regular. You
yeah. I
got
mean,
it.
perfect.
You got
Just
it.
the visage and the expressions are
Yeah.
again. So we're talking about all of the different hats that Kurosawa wears, and I have to assume he's instrumental in the casting as well. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
choosing
No, he
exactly the right actor,
exactly.
right face for the part.
The only film that Toshiro Mifune, is not in from 1947 through 1965 is Ikiru.
That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, it was like, okay, I have Mifune. What am I going to do with him
Yeah.
now?
It's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah, it's a great problem. In Seven Samurai, he makes him a youngster. The following year, with a lesser known Kurosawa movie called I Live in Fear, aka Record of a Living Being, but when it was released in the West, it was called I Live in Fear. He plays an old guy. He plays a guy in his 60s. So he goes
Versatility.
from a yeah, Mifune goes from a kid in his 20s to a guy in his 60s. Not that people don't know him. I'd say he's slightly underrated as an
Yeah,
actor.
incredible range.
Yeah.
Yes, and some people will say he's chewing the scenery in Seven Samurai. I completely disagree. I think that, again, the gamut of emotions he shows is very impressive.
No, I agree. I think he chose the scenery. He chose the scenery in Rashomon, but that's a deliberate characterization. I think Kurosawa told him, "Go ahead and chew." But in Seven Samurai, he manages, as you say, he really manages to be both outrageous and also quiet and
Yeah.
intense and sad. No, it's a wonderful
I
performance.
love your breakdown of what makes this movie great. You're talking about the themes, you're talking about the filmmaking, the
That's it.
structure, obviously Kurosawa himself. I want to get into what makes Kurosawa one of the master directors in just a little while. But if I could chime in here a little bit with some of the observations I had after this most recent watch of Seven Samurai, I agree with you. You use the word timeless. To me, absolutely, it's an evergreen picture. It's eternally rewarding every rewatch for several reasons, David. Most of all because it's a straightforward narrative. It's a narrative that's easily understood and can be appreciated universally. And to me, that's the key to Seven Samurai. There's a reason why this story continues to be remade by newer filmmakers time and again, because it continually appeals and satisfies across any language, any cultural boundary. It can be freshly adapted to many different genres as well, from westerns to science fiction to anime to a Pixar family film like A Bug's Life. Who'da thunk, right? I mean,
That's right.
it's nearly impossible not to become immediately captivated by the premise and the central conflict, by the plight of the farmers and the camaraderie and the respect between the samurai. And yes, this is a long film that requires patience for maybe a virgin viewer. I made the case earlier that I think we're more attuned to long form content now, but yes, it's twice the runtime of most features. It has an intermission that maybe seems a little archaic by today's standards. And there are several different characters to keep track of. Yes, folks, there are subtitles, but it doesn't feel bloated. There's no shot or scene that is superfluous to me. Kurosawa is working in a long form epic medium here, but he demonstrates such superb skills, right, in his storytelling, in his character introductions, in his development of those characters, in the compositions and the editing, the action staging, the fight choreography, that there's no way this movie can fail or disappoint. That's my take.
No, I know. That's funny that you say that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it is straightforward. The brigands come to the village. Village says, "Go to town and get hungry samurai."
Great line.
Yeah, that's a great line. They find the samurai. They go back to the village. They set up the defenses, train the villagers, and then the brigands attack.
What's hard to understand? Anybody could pick up this.
Exactly.
In a way, this is a story that could have been a silent film way back in the era. And they could have pulled it off. The point is that you may have to read subtitles, but it's such an accessible text. And that longer length, it permits us to get much better acquainted with the various farmers, the various samurai.
Yeah.
It provides breathing room for subplots like Katsushiro's romance with Shino. And the reason behind Rikichi's anger, right? It builds tension as we wait for the passing of the seasons, the inevitable return of the bandits. Here I want to read you, this is Kenneth Turan, who we actually had on the show most recently for Dr. Strangelove. He said, Seven Samurai unrolls naturally and pleasurably like a beautiful scroll or valuable rug, luxuriating in its elongation. It takes an entire hour just for the basic task of choosing the titular seven. Rather than try to ignore time, the film emphasizes its passage, underlining key scenes with a quiet but insistent drumbeat that could almost be a clock ticking off the inexorable seconds.
Yes, it's very eloquent, but he's right. It does take an hour, and that's part of what when the 160-minute version cuts out a lot of that. Remember the workman, the guy who says, I wouldn't be a farmer for anything.
Yeah.
And so you have that's just like a little subplot. You don't need these workmen there.
No.
They're just adding a flavor to the whole film. And in fact, it's the workmen who get Kanbei to decide to help.
That's true.
Yeah, when they say, they've been eating gruel and they're giving you white rice. And it's actually, there's a great line in the remake, in the Magnificent Seven, when the same thing with the farmers asking Yul Brynner to help, and someone says they're offering you everything they have, and Yul Brynner says, I've been offered a lot for my services, but never everything. And so the Magnificent Seven understands the importance of acknowledging the sacrifice of the farmers. So these four little guys who come to town and are overwhelmed, would be easy to ignore. In fact, some people knock them down, other people berate them, other people ignore them. So and of course, each and every samurai gets his own little bit.
Right.
And again, so many films do that by understanding how to introduce these characters.
Yeah, you think of like Heihachi with, splitting of the logs.
Right. And so there's another great line there when Gorobe comes back to Kanbei and he says, I found another guy who's willing. He's not a great swordsman,
right?
but he's a good guy. Right?
He's gonna keep us in stitches,
exactly,
right? He's gonna provide some comic relief, and he does. What I find so interesting, not to jump topics, but later, isn't it Heihachi who has the sit down with Rikichi and says, "Hey, man, you got to talk about these things. Don't bottle them up." So it shows the multifaceted nature of that character, and you think about how so many of these characters here, many of them, are much smaller parts. We can't shine the spotlight on everybody equally.
No.
But so many of these characters are audience accessible. They're given interesting personalities, intriguing backstories, or relatable motivations that help the viewer better understand and root for them.
That's right. And that's also why it's important that although they are all, with the exception of Heihachi, great swordsmen, it's very important that some of them must die.
Oh, it's crucial.
It's crucial.
Because again, it raises the stakes. Otherwise,
right.
What was the sacrifice for? There has to be some tragedy in this tale.
And that's exactly what's wrong with superhero movies, by the way, not to get off topic. But, you're not going to kill off your Spider-Man, your Thor. You can't. You got to have a sequel. But there's very little risk for the superhero. But when all of a sudden Heihachi, who was actually the first samurai to die, when he's killed, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, this could be a little more tricky than we thought.
Also, I want to quote here James Berardinelli. He's an online critic who wrote that an average samurai film focuses on a sword-wielding superhero-type individual who battles his way through the story, often triumphing over a seemingly overwhelming host of foes. But Seven Samurai offers us flawed protagonists, some of whom are not skilled fighters, and one of whom is often drunk, belligerent, and decidedly non-heroic in his approach. This is exactly what you were touching on. These are well-rounded characters with flaws. They are human beings, and some of them have extraordinary powers. You think of Hyuzo.
Yes. It's interesting. That actor, Miyagawa Seiji, is not normally in samurai movies. If you look at him, he's very small, he's very slight. And Kurosawa, it's not so much he cast him against type, but he's not, you could have had Mifune, who's actually bigger than average Japanese. But Kyuzo is such a great character. In every variation of Seven Samurai, you got to have a Kyuzo character. So again, Kurosawa is so easily remakeable. And you said it exactly right. Every culture can understand it. It's simple, it's direct.
Yes.
And when it comes time to remake, you can slot in your own cultural kind of characters. And Kyuzo is never not one of the main characters, the master. But his flaw, of course, is that he only cares about being a master swordsman.
I kind of equate him to, if you've seen the Lord of the Rings films by Peter Jackson, he's kind of like the Legolas. And if you recall Legolas in those films, he kind of can do everything. He's an incredible archer. He's super swift. He can ride down the trolls and things like that. And he's a handy guy to have in a fight.
He's a handy guy.
Right.
I love Legolas. I've seen Lord of the Rings many times, but that's an interesting comparison.
But just the overall arching point to me is we think of Seven Samurai as an action drama, but it actually wields elements of many different genres, including a little bit of romance, a fair share of tragedy, and some comedy. There's a lot of comedy. It's a funnier film than you probably remember, consistently infusing humor across that 3.5-hour story runtime and adding, I think, a counterbalance of levity to the serious and somber and suspenseful moments that predominate. And the result, to me, is a more well-rounded entertainment emotionally. There are so many memorable lines that hit the funny bone, like the fine, hungry samurai line.
Hungry samurai.
Give your wives plenty of lovin' tonight, you hear? Does any of you have a cute sister? Take a good look at your daughter. I mean your son. And I love where he's trying to, ride the horse. And he says, "You fool, damn you. You call yourself a horse. For shame. Hey, wait, please. I apologize. Forgive me," as it's running away. They're not cheap laughs. They're well-earned, and they're also well-timed. They break up the suspense quite nicely.
Well, you probably need to have that. I mean, the 3.5-hour movie, there's a good reason that Alfred Hitchcock never made a movie much longer than 2 hours. I mean, how are you going to sustain tension and suspense, keeping your audience on edge? I mean, you just exhaust them. Whereas Kurosawa, but not only by varying the pace, but of course by varying the kind of interactions and the comedy, the tragedy, the action, it's really a brilliant thing.
Yeah, and Kikuchio, that character, and of course Mifune's performance of such is, to me, pivotal here. He expresses, as I said earlier, I'll say it again, this impressive dramatic range. And yes, he has buffoonish behavior. There is lack of battle experience. He has these vainglorious ambitions at points, and he makes poor tactical choices that, let's face it, result in the deaths of others. He left his post. But he demonstrates exceptional heroism. And I got to be honest with you, it wasn't cheaply manipulated or unearned. I shed a couple tears about Kikuchio on this recent rewatch. I really was moved by his story and the arc of his character. Of course, there's the impassioned monologue, David, right? Addressing the samurai.
Oh, yes.
Offering the counter-argument to an emotionally and morally complicated situation where the audience and the samurai feel skeptical about the farmers. What does he say? He says, "There's no creature on earth as wily as a farmer. Ask them for rice, barley, anything, and all they will say is, 'We're out.' They kowtow and lie, playing innocent the whole time. You name it, they'll cheat you on it. After a battle, they'll hunt down the losers with their spears. Farmers are misers, weasels, crybabies. They're mean, stupid murderers. But tell me this, who turned them into such monsters? You samurai did."
Right.
He says, "Damn you to hell. In war, you burn their villages, trample their fields, steal their food, work them like slaves, rape their women, and kill them if they resist. What the hell are farmers supposed to do?"
Yes, it's a great moment and that's a culturally very specific thing where, the farmers go out and not only strip dead samurai, but wounded samurai they can kill. So when Kikuchio finds this cache of arms, he thinks, "Oh, this is fantastic," until the other samurai realize that that's where the farmers got it, right? So it's that moral dilemma of the farmers are not necessarily better than the samurai.
Right.
But there's a kind of, there's good farmers, there's brave farmers, just as there are good samurai and bad samurai. You have to think that most of I love the word brigands, I never use the word brigands except in relation to Seven Samurai.
Yeah, it's
But you got to think about who are the bandits. Now, of course, anyone, as Kikuchi demonstrates, anyone can get armor and weapons and become a bandit. But you have to think that the bandits are probably, many of them anyway, former samurai, because they have what is rare at the time, and that is the long guns.
Yeah, the firearms, the muskets.
That's a Kurosawa specialty, to know the history of the period.
Yeah, plus they've got that headgear, the headgear that looks like Darth Vader helmet. What, I don't know what you
Oh,
call
yeah.
that. What do you call that?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what you call it, but I wonder if the Darth Vader helmet was inspired by that.
I think it absolutely was. I'm just guessing as much. But, you know, and a quick tangent, and we'll get back here. I'm watching the current version of Shogun on FX, and I'm really enjoying it, my wife and I. And there's a great scene where they show the full battle gear with that Darth Vader-ish helmet. It's off on the side. It's not being worn by someone. It's just on display.
Yeah.
And my wife and I looked at each other like, that's Darth Vader. Jesus.
I never put that together, but you're absolutely right. I mean, he was so influenced by Kurosawa that it must be right. The battle armor and the long gun tactics, right? The brigands know their tactics, just so that Kanbei can build defenses because he knows how you fight. Remember, the samurai have just come off a very large battle. The film is set during a specific historical period, right before 1600.
Yes, this is a time of civil war.
Yeah. They call it constant. The period called constant civil war. They call it, and in a few years, the Tokugawa shogun would be established, right? The shogun, as you're watching Shogun, Tokugawa clan. So the first Tokugawa would establish peace, but they're all battle hardened, and so the brigands are not just a bunch of kids who are trying to steal the wheat of farmers. So it's a very difficult, and they have a fortress, and they're and the head of them is pretty mean looking. I like that guy.
I love how Kurosawa distinguishes the bandits from, the good samurai. Obviously, they're going to be just an amorphous, abstract bunch of baddies, and they're not given any speaking lines, really, and we're not shown their POV. Some people will say that's a missed opportunity. I don't agree, but
no,
it's already 3.5 hours long. How much longer are you going to make it? But my point being that, I love that, one of them gets a patch on his eye, another one, wields the musket. A few of them are wearing those helmets that we're talking about. So there's just enough to kind of differentiate them.
Well, what happens to the movie if you also give the brigands backstory? You give somebody backstory, you make them sympathetic. And the whole point is that they are largely an amorphous mass, difficult to defeat. And that's what the farmers are up against. They're not up against, men who have had their livelihoods taken away. They're not men who are equally victims of the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera.
In Westerns, though, in many classic Westerns, you'll sometimes have, scenes where we're shown the perspective of the bad guys. And it doesn't necessarily make us sympathetic to them. You think of something like Once Upon a Time in the West or Fistful of Dollars. It can be done, but again, those filmmakers are working in 2-hour or so medium. This is twice the length, so you can't do everything.
You're right. Some do. I just think that we get exactly what we need of the brigands. The reason that Kikuchi can fit in so easily is that probably they're kind of guys like him for the most part, right? They think, oh yeah, he's a wild, tough guy like us. He's not a disciplined warrior.
And it makes sense that when he steals into their camp and absconds with one of the muskets, he isn't instantly recognized right away. He can fit in a bit.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Because I think he's a little bit like them. And that's a great moment though when he comes running out of the woods and he jumps up with the rifle in his hand.
Right. Oh, it's so good.
And then Kanbei is mad at him and he can't understand why. He did something heroic.
You soon realize like leaving the post can have terrible repercussions. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's true.
I want to talk a little bit here about what was innovative or influential or unique about Seven Samurai in its day among Japanese films and in cinema history. this is kind of the film primarily responsible for introducing the Japanese samurai character into Western pop culture in the 20th century, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, you have a plethora of samurai films and chanbara, meaning sword fighting movies, that were produced in Japan and across the world following Seven Samurai. It's not the first samurai movie, I'm not saying that.
Right. No.
But
no.
it's the one that put it on the map in the West.
Yes, but you have to remember it did. It absolutely did. And it was distributed. It wasn't a huge hit, by the way, in the States, but it was distributed and people did know it and it did play in festivals. But it definitely put samurai on the map for sure. Now, in Japan, it was very innovative. The vast majority of samurai movies focus on a lone hero, a swordsman who has to do a vendetta, a wanderer. But basically, all of your samurai movies star one guy, and that's your focus.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Samurai Trilogy. Isn't that Mifune himself in that?
The Samurai Trilogy, based on Miyamoto Musashi, the famous. That's right.
Or Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman.
Yeah. Well, those come after.
Yes.
But there were all 30 of them.
Oh, they're fun movies. I'll tell you.
Great.
I had a blast watching those.
About half the movies that the Japanese made before World War II were period movies.
Mm-hmm.
But again, most of the ones about swordsmen, in fact, except for the ones about the Loyal 47 Ronin, which aren't action movies, and they don't actually, and those never focus on all 47 Ronin. Now, only Kurosawa could have pulled that off. But mostly they focus on a lone hero. So now Kurosawa focuses on a group. And second of all, he gets away from sword fighting. I mean, the sword fights are quick and deadly. There's no chambara. Chambara, means clang, clang, clang. That's what. So there's really none of that.
Yeah, it's not going to be like an Errol Flynn swashbuckler.
Yeah, he's making an action movie, but to me, he's making a war movie.
Yes.
In some ways, closer to a war movie than to a samurai movie.
It could be the best war movie ever made if you really want to think about it that way.
It has to be the best war movie ever made, and the best action movie ever made, and the best samurai movie ever made.
I mean, it's got it all in one, folks.
It does have it all. But of course, if you just want a sheer swordplay movie, Kurosawa also made the best sheer swordplay movie. And that's a movie called Yojimbo.
It's a good one. Of course, got remade as Fistful of Dollars.
That's right. Reworked many times, not as often as Seven Samurai. But again, so Kurosawa knows what he's doing, how it is. But Seven Samurai was revolutionary in Japan, especially since the occupation, which ended in 1952, from 45 to 52, the Americans occupied Japan as their penance for having lost the war. And they made very few movies about samurai. So Kurosawa is also reintroducing the possibility of a big budget samurai movie. And one of the things that happens afterward is Inagaki makes the Samurai Trilogy, which is I remember is in color.
Yes, it is.
Uses Mifune and etc.
Yeah, wonderfully entertaining in their own right. Also available on Criterion. Highly recommended.
Yes, definitely. Anyway, yes, it was very revolutionary. And because he took his time with it, in a way, he emphasized fighting, but not swordplay. I mean, Kanbei's great climax is him with the bow and arrow.
Yeah, great point. And I want to talk about this a little bit more. We'll dovetail back when we talk Kurosawa and some of the choices he makes. But yeah, you used the word remake a moment ago, and let's get into it here because Seven Samurai has been reinterpreted cinematically numerous times, and that speaks to its timeless qualities, its ubiquitousness as a classic film text. So among the remakes are, I'm going to kind of go chronologically here from what I found, did a little digging. So yes, you have, of course, The Magnificent Seven. That's 1960, Hollywood. And they also remade The Magnificent Seven, most recently in 2016, by the way. Never got a chance to see it, but check it out if you're so inclined. There was Kill a Dragon, 1967, The Invincible Six from 1970. There's a Bollywood film called Sholay from 1975. Duel of the Seven Tigers is 1979. Here's where it delves into sci-fi. Battle Beyond the Stars, which was 1980. The Seven Magnificent Gladiators was released in 1983. You could tell they're really milking it here, right? Think of the title. Seven Warriors is 1989. Then you have A Bug's Life, the Pixar film from 98. And as soon as I'm sitting in the theater with my youngster, I'm looking at the screen and wow, this is pretty much a complete remake of Seven Samurai, except with a lot more comedy.
Yeah, if you didn't know it, it would have been really fun
Yeah,
to hit
it is
upon it.
fun.
Yeah.
And then there's China Gate, 1998, same year. The Japanese anime series called Samurai 7.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2004. There's also The Magnificent 11 from 2013. Now, it's also been credited, Seven Samurai has, with influencing later Hollywood and spaghetti westerns, of course, from Once Upon a Time in the West to The Wild Bunch to The Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
We're giving you a smattering, a sample size, but not the entire smorgasbord here. Trust us, this is one of the most influential movies of all time.
Nope, you're absolutely right. And that's a great bit of research because it's funny, Sholay is the second most popular movie in the history of Bollywood.
That's incredible.
And
wow.
Supposedly it played 15 years at the same theater. But the thing about Sholay is it only has two heroes.
Oh, okay. So it's the two samurai.
Yeah, this guy who's always wearing a kind of cape over his whole body.
Interesting.
Goes and enlists these two pals to protect the village from brigands. And then China Gate has basically the same story as Seven Samurai, except that he doesn't need to find the guys. He goes and gets back his old friends from the
a little twist there.
Yeah, from the Battle of China Gate.
What a lineage to follow. And then also, David, Seven Samurai is one of the first movies to employ the plot device of enlisting and gathering heroes into a group to accomplish a mission. And so, what do you have in its wake? Well, countless films like The Great Escape, The Dirty Dozen, The Guns of Navarone, The Blues Brothers, Ocean's 11, the sequels to Ocean's 11, Inglourious Bastards, Justice League. You could go on and on.
Oh, that's right.
And you consider, too, how each of the Seven Samurai is separately introduced, as we discussed, and given their own initial spotlight. So it's been argued that Seven Samurai started this trend. Now, I'm not a film historian. I'm going to defer to your expertise here, but it sounds like it's fair evidence to me.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I'm glad you could point to something like The Dirty Dozen, which has got a lot of influence from Seven Samurai in its style, as well as its characters. And of course, some don't make it. And it's one of the masterpieces in the wake of Seven Samurai that people might not think of automatically as being. And then you mentioned before The Wild Bunch. Absolutely. In fact, to my knowledge, I tried to find out at some point, but to my knowledge, Seven Samurai might be the first movie to use slow motion in an action scene.
Yeah, I was wondering that because, of course, you mentioned Wild Bunch. That's famous for the stylized slow motion kills and violence and shoot 'em ups.
Right.
And here it's used more sparingly.
Very sparingly.
He does he repeats it. It's been used a few times in Seven. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, it was an avant-garde film technique, right? Experimental cinema that played with it. But to have a mainstream movie and then you have a sword fight with Cuso and the loudmouth, and then all of a sudden it's in slow motion. What?
Yeah, it is a little off-putting at first. Like, I remember the first time watching Seven Samurai, like, whoa, okay, we're supposed to really pay attention to this.
Yeah, it's really, and I love the way he falls. But still, yeah, as far as I know, no action movie had ever used slow motion before.
That's interesting.
And it became not standard. I mean, Peckinpah, of course, takes it maybe to the farthest degree it can. And there are other aspects of Seven Samurai in The Wild Bunch as well. But the use of slow motion and the gathering of the men.
Yeah, here's another one, David. It's among the first movies to use the action-adventure device of introducing a main protagonist in a dangerous side plot that isn't related to the later main plot. Now, a classic golden rule example is Raiders of the Lost Ark. It opens with Indiana Jones, but it's not the main, search for the Ark adventure. He's in Peru, I think it is, searching for this golden idol.
Right.
So I don't know if this carries any weight, but again, could be the first or one of the first films to use that device. Do you think this holds water?
Oh, it does. It does hold water. But the thing is, you have to demonstrate skill and character. So what better way to demonstrate skill and character than to give each of the samurai their little introductory moment?
Yes. But the best one is, yes, there is Kyotso, like you said, but the best one is Kanbei.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The first one introduced, and he's introduced in such a dramatic fashion that really gets you.
It really does. Well, that scene introduces us both to Katsushiro and Kikuchio.
Yes.
So it's a very important scene because you get three of the seven. Yeah.
Yeah, it's efficient because, you get the three characters in one. There you go.
Now, that particular character of Kanbei and that subplot of going in and rescuing a child by posing as a priest is actually based on a historical incident that Kurosawa dug up.
Is that right?
So, yeah, he wanted to make a movie about samurai, and his first idea was to make like an omnibus film. Each story would be about a different samurai. And his writing partner said, no. But Kurosawa had, I think, 6 or 7 stories in mind. So he made the 7 samurai.
Now, I also read that the actual central conflict of the villagers being harassed by bandits and them having to hire, Ronin to protect them, that was also based on a true account. Did you hear this too?
Kurosawa wanted to ask a question. How does a Ronin eat? How does a guy who no longer has a home, a family, a master, a clan, what does he do for money?
Yeah, right.
Right? And in other words, how does he eat?
Mm-hmm.
So he heard that samurai would hire off to villagers, mostly for the price of a few meals.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe there's something there.
There's something there.
Just to kind of finish this thought on innovation or influential, we can also thank Seven Samurai's climactic concluding battle scene in the rain and the mud for inspiring so many similar sequences in films to come. You think of Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight. A few years later, The Two Towers, the second in Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Matrix Revolutions. I think that's the last of the first 3 Matrix movies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. John Wick, countless others. I'm going to read you here. This is an unnamed author from the BFI who said, endlessly influential, the scene contrasts the insistent downward motion of the rain with the sideways movements of the bandits in a highly organized visual scheme which is paradoxically both frenzied and formal. But whether you agree with that or not, just the fact that he chooses to shoot the climactic scene in the rain and the mud. Now, of course, that's going to present all kinds of logistical and filming challenges. It's got to be cold as hell. You see vapor coming out of the actors' mouths, and like half of them are half naked. It's cold out there. But again, just the bravura and the guts to do that in the rain. And they had a rain-making machine. It wasn't raining naturally out there.
No, well, it rains a lot in Japan during the monsoon season, a couple of months when it's May and June. Kurosawa likes rain. I think he likes the graphics of it. No film besides Seven Samurai does that better than Rashomon, for instance. That's just an unbelievable use of rain.
But fighting in the rain, David, that's quite different. That's difficult to pull off.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, but remember the 10 months that it took Kurosawa to make Seven Samurai, part of the time was it just, weather. Weather is always going to be a problem when you're out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, he shot it way outside of Tokyo, over on the other side of Japan, near Kyoto. And he's just, he likes it. But the other thing that he innovated, which he would then use even in non-action movie, is multi-camera shooting. You have to remember he started using 3 cameras to shoot these once-in-a-lifetime scenes.
So is that to say that contemporary filmmakers of this era, whether they were Japanese or Westerners, were not necessarily employing multiple cameras in such a sequence?
No, they were not. He was the first to employ multi-camera shooting.
So that's a big deal, right? Because you're able to capture a lot of different angles.
Right, but that also helps explain a little bit of the costs. Because although they may not be printing everything, they are shooting 3 times twice as much.
But you got great coverage.
Great coverage, but you can't keep doing it. So you want your coverage. And he did that for many of his films, even the ones that weren't that complex. It's almost like he pioneered how you shoot television, multi-camera TV.
Right. I think it was Ricky Ricardo on the I Love Lucy show that pioneered the multi-camera technique on television. So
that's true.
6 degrees of separation, Kurosawa to Ricky Ricardo. Who'da thunk?
I'm not gonna say that he's influenced. But the other thing is Kurosawa pioneers I believe in this film, the use of long lenses
Mm.
to shoot action scenes as well.
Wow, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, because that, it compresses the action and it really makes it more. And then you have an indistinguishable between the rain and the characters, right? Everything is flattened in a long lens.
Yes.
Especially when you don't have when you're not shooting in depth, so he's really compressing things. I mean,
Right.
he would use the long lens a lot of times later, but to my knowledge, I don't remember any long lens.
So he's pulling everything out of his bag of tricks.
He's got three cameras, so he can have one with a long lens, one with a medium lens, and one with the wide angle lens.
And of course, the viewer, we're not aware of all these tricks, techniques going on behind the scenes. We're just aware of great filmmaking because the storytelling is just fluid. The visuals just, and the editing, it runs across your eyes like butter, and you're sad when it's over because despite the long run time, you just want it to keep going. It's great filmmaking.
It's the dynamism of the editing.
Yes.
I think it's what made Kurosawa famous in the first place, that nobody was really editing, nobody was putting films together like he was. And then after a while, people realized, he's also doing some very interesting things with long takes.
Yes.
He's doing some interesting things with shifts of perspective. And of course, Kurosawa, I would say is very memorable for his characters.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you think about all the Seven Samurai, also think about Yojimbo, think about Throne of Blood, think about Rashomon. I mean, he's a guy that's putting people on screen and putting them in movies that are so compelling. And you asked me to talk about Kurosawa, I guess I'm jumping the gun, but that's what makes Kurosawa great.
Yes. We are going to dig a little deeper into Kurosawa momentarily. I just want to finish one more thought about innovative or influential. What's also distinctive and perhaps innovative about Seven Samurai, and this is going back to an earlier point we were bandying about, is that most of the character deaths, most of them are not glorified or exaggerated. Some kills are depicted in stylized slow motion, yes, but no death is protracted or, I would say, sentimentalized for dramatic emotional effect. I mean, we do see the samurai mourn certain deaths. We witness Katsushiro weeps at the shooting of Gyotso. But not a lot of exaggeration or glorification. Here I'm going to read you, this is Brian Eggert from Deep Focus Review. He said that in each case, death is clumsy and unforgiving and unsophisticated. Capturing the battle from numerous angles did not aestheticize his violence into graceful interplays of warrior and bandit. However, we feel each death as Kurosawa remains dedicated to realism on all fronts.
I agree with that. The thing that's most important for Kurosawa is that all four samurai who die by the rifle.
Yeah, that's true.
They all die by rifle from off screen. That is, you don't see, it's not like a cause and effect. You don't see somebody aim and then hit. So it's almost as if death comes from off frame.
But it's also a clash between, New World versus Old World. They represent the noble Bushido ideals, and they're being killed by a bullet coming off screen by a violent offender who, has none of the grace or the skill that these samurai have.
No, that's very true. That's very true. So as you say, there is this Old World versus New World, the technology that's going to render samurai obsolete, etc. But the fact that it comes from off screen, and the fact that they all die by rifle, is very important. The only way I take exception, so to speak, it's a minor thing, in terms of not aestheticized death, but in terms of mournful death, is Kikuchiyo. He is shown lying in the mud, and the way in which his armor has ridden up so that you see his buttocks makes him look like a kid.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
So in that respect, focusing on him is a little bit of the tears. I think if you're going to cry, that's the moment you're going to cry. If Kurosawa doesn't show you, he's dead. If he doesn't show you his death, then you don't have time to mourn.
But that's just it, though, David. Like, I agree with what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing. But he doesn't linger long. Like in a Hollywood version of a death like that, we'd have several villagers and samurai rushing to his side, and we'd probably spend a good minute or two just watching them mourn him or just look to the heavens or something like that. It's over relatively quickly. I think we see Katsushiro mourn Gyotso for a longer time than Kikuchiyo.
You could be right. I just remember that image of Kikuchiyo lying in the mud, which is unglamorous.
That's true.
and a little bit. But you're right about, think about the equivalent of what happens to Charles Bronson's character in The Magnificent Seven. These kids, when he's shot, these kids, they come with the flowers and the grave, and it's a whole big deal. That's a whole thing about he says, if I die, then when he dies, right?
Yeah, like here, they could have. We see that the children they formed a Kikuchio fan club. They love him.
Oh yeah, they love him.
And they could show later, like the kids, gathered around the mound on the hill that represents Kikuchio's grave. Like he could have milked it, right? He doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't milk it. And when he does show the graves, remember the final shot of the samurai, Kikuchio, the farmers. It's all in the one shot. It's three shots, but it's the same scene.
Yes.
And they're all kind of equalized by the mounds, if you will. And we mourn, but we mourn after the fact.
Right. Like another filmmaker might choose to, okay, let's do a close up of mound number 1. Then we go to mound number 2.
Yeah.
Then we go to mound number 3.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Like maybe they'll do like an inset of like a dissolve of the face or some ridiculous sentimentalization. Thankfully, Kurosawa doesn't do that.
You know who does that in a way? Peckinpah.
Ah, okay.
At the end of the Wild Bunch, he goes a little. They're all dead. No spoilers. But the four remaining bunch are all dead. He superimposes shots of them when they're alive.
I kind of remember this now. Yeah,
they're all laughing. Yeah,
yep.
that's right. So Peckinpah does that. So your instinct is right.
So we let's shift into Kurosawa. You were starting to talk about some of the things that make him a master filmmaker. If I could introduce a concept here, just the patterns, the symbols that repeated throughout Seven Samurai, a common motif of circles, like represented by groups that form in circular shapes and the round symbols on the flag signifying 6 of the samurai. Interestingly, you got that triangle on the flag that stands for Kikuchio, and he's aspiring to be a circle, but he falls on the spectrum between samurai and farmer, right? But the director, you were talking about this, he favors, different shots of people grouped together. When a single individual is featured alone in a shot, it's often meant to suggest maybe his or her detachment or emotional distance from the group he or she is compared to. I think of Rikichi, separate from the group in an earlier shot. But yeah, he'll often group individuals together very carefully, very deliberately.
Oh, yes. Well, I don't think there's a shot in any Kurosawa movie that isn't well thought out. I mean, just, whether a character is walking, the position vis-a-vis the lens, everything I think is perfect. Sometimes for artistry, just to give you a shot, like you could take individual shots of the village that make it look like, oh yeah, this is like a nice 16th century Japanese village. Or this is like a nice ink painting, or a group shots. Absolutely. He's just, that's what he does. And because the film is about men in groups, you're going to get different shots like that. I mean, Kurosawa's emphasizing that a lot.
As often as possible, he's grouping the 7 samurai together in a shot, or as many of them clustered together in a shot as possible. Of course, there are solitary shots of Kenbai and some others, but for the most part, it's meant to suggest unison, that they're kind of working together.
Oh yes, well, another thing that's cut a bit from the short version is the trek to the village, in which you have all 6. And then Kikuchio, constantly, and then finally Kikuchio is allowed to join, and then you have all 7.
It's really well done.
Really
Absolutely.
It really is.
I was really paying attention on this recent watch of how Kurosawa's camera can, within the same continuous shot, mind you, pan in one direction to follow a character or group, and then suddenly switch direction. Suddenly you're panning in the opposite direction to keep pace with one or more new figures who have entered the frame. And so to me, this crisscrossing movement, it ties into the film's themes of maybe human duality or contrasting forces.
It's that's something that I don't know what films specifically Kurosawa saw, although he saw many films. The panning on motion and then having your eye get switched from one character to another. I first noticed in the great French director Jean Renoir.
There you go. So I'm not saying Kurosawa invented it, but
but it might very well be that Kurosawa had seen Renoir, because Renoir was among the most famous filmmakers in history in the 30s.
If you're going to steal from the greats.
Well, he was influenced in his editing by Eisenstein.
There you go.
So if you're going to steal from the best.
If you think about close-ups in Seven Samurai, they're used pretty sparingly. The director often prefers single, uninterrupted, medium, or long shots to paint a broader canvas of heroes, villains, and conflict. So, yeah, and you, of course, have remarked several times in this conversation about the seamless editing and, of course, the masterful action choreography shots. The battle sequences happen pretty quickly. There's no big swashbuckling, daring-do kind of extended Errol Flynn sequence or something like that.
That's right.
But yet the fight choreography is really tight and impressive.
I agree 100%, but that's why I would say that the choreography between the action of the characters and the cameras is very, very important, because there is no lingering on fights. There's no one-on-one sword fight that lasts 30 seconds, a minute, right? There's no, Zatoichi versus Yojimbo where they go off. It's a nice film, but they do their thing for a long time. Or like a Chinese martial arts movie, right? The climax is the hero and the villain, and it goes on for 5 minutes.
Roger Ebert was really tied into this point. He said in his review of the movie, nobody could photograph men in action better than Kurosawa.
Right.
One of his particular trademarks is the use of human tides, sweeping down from higher places to lower ones, and he loves to devise shots in which the camera follows the rush and flow of an action instead of cutting it up into separate shots. This is what you were just talking about.
And this is where I think he gets it from Eisenstein, although he makes it his own. But he gets it from Eisenstein, who had to have masses, right? It's the masses, not the individuals, in an Eisenstein movie, in the Russian movie, in the communist movie. But Kurosawa adapts it for the action movie. But when he does use a close-up, it's always very nice. So there's close-ups on Shino, and she's like, oh, yes. And when the movie is quiet, you get some close-ups.
Yes.
And there's close-ups in the town, although his close-ups tend to be medium close-ups rather than what Hollywood likes, which is, we could just call it full close-up. But anyway.
And they're often reaction shots, like a Katsushiro or a Kenbai.
Right, reaction shots indeed, that's right. But, the pacing of a 3.5-hour movie. But, you were talking way earlier about how you could watch this movie, and that American audiences are now used to longer movies. But what's interesting about this movie is that it's not slow. So don't think of this, anyone who's listening and thinks, oh, it's a foreign film with subtitles, don't think of this as an art movie, although it's artful.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not a contemporary art movie that belongs to a genre of cinema which has come to be called slow cinema. The last thing that Kurosawa ever wants is for anybody to go, oh, this movie's slow.
Yeah, boring. Yeah. Pick up the pace, brother.
Yeah,
no worries there.
Right.
Like I said, it's over too quickly for me.
It's amazingly paced. And the brilliance of Kurosawa is to pace the pacing so that you will have a scene or two of longer takes, or just a scene or two in which they're talking, followed by an action scene.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And so you keep everyone engaged and you move it along until, of course, the climax, which is good, solid, 10, 12 minutes of action, all cut up in chunks that, the brilliance of the final scene is that because the defenses have broken down finally, directional movement is gone. So if there's a left to right movement, there's an equal right to left movement. And what I mean is, here's an example, is Kanbei at one point is shown with his bow and arrow, and the arrow is pointing off screen to the left. In a slightly later scene, there he is with the arrow pointing off to the right.
To the right, yeah.
So you either say, okay, Kurosawa's crossed the 180-degree line, or this thing is chaos. And
probably more of the latter. Although I'm sure he isn't afraid to break few rules.
He is not afraid to break the 180-degree rule, but in the final scene, I think his point is that it is chaos.
War is hell,
and they're coming from everywhere. Yeah, the samurai, you see a shot of Shichiroji leading his band off to the right. Then you see a shot of Gorobe leading his band off to the left.
Yes, and don't forget it's raining
and it's
pretty
raining.
heavily. And again, that vertical versus horizontal
Yes,
motion,
right.
which kind of maybe offsets the eye a little bit.
Well, it is horizontal because they're all running.
Yes.
And what Kurosawa sometimes does, as you say, is not only are they running, but the camera is either tracking or panning or both, a tracking pan with them.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary if you think about all of the motion, the flurry of activity that's competing against each other in a given shot or sequence, especially in the climactic battle.
And it's exactly why Kurosawa can handle long takes, editing, deep focus, character movement, camera scale, shot scale. It's exactly because Kurosawa can do it all that I think he's the greatest filmmaker. That doesn't mean that, I don't love Ozu. We talked about Tokyo Story. I mean, how can you not be affected by Tokyo Story, which is also a pretty simple film on the surface of it. But Ozu doesn't do quite as much as Kurosawa with action.
No, I mean, completely different narratives. Let's be fair about it.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder to make an action epic like this than I would argue it would be to make something like Tokyo Story. Not belittling it at all.
No,
folks.
well,
it's
of course
just,
we
it's a different animal.
Yeah, all we did was praise it before, and justifiably. And it's a different kind of movie. But the point is that across his career, as well as across Seven Samurai, Kurosawa is able. See, he's the greatest filmmaker who worked in both period movies and modern stories. I mean, I mentioned Ikiru takes place in 1952. I would put maybe second or third place Kurosawa's detective film called High and Low.
High and Low, which they're remaking now. I think Spike Lee is redoing that.
I mean, Spike's remakes have been.
I said something. Yeah.
I think Spike is an underrated filmmaker. But his remakes of Asian movies leave much to be desired.
Maybe it's a little hubris to think you can redo a Kurosawa, but hey, let's see what he does with it.
They remade Ikiru as Living with one of the world's great actors in Bill Nighy, who got an Oscar nomination for it. But I'll tell you what, I thought Living was a terrible movie.
Yeah, and of course you think of the Rashomon remake, The Outrage.
Oh, well, that's,
Yojimbo was pretty nicely redone as Fistful of Dollars, let's be honest. And so it can be done.
Oh, it can be done. But Rashomon was remade 1 billion times by using the Rashomon effect. The Outrage is just a bad movie. But the thousands of times Rashomon has been referenced.
Yeah, no question about it, right? So, this is the Big Megillah. What are some of Seven Samurai's major thematic takeaways, David?
One of the things is about male camaraderie and male bonding. Men at war and men in difficult situations. But the kind of grace under fire is an important theme. Another important theme is what I call the crossing of class boundaries, which the samurai is not just a class, but it's a caste. The interaction with farmers would have been very minimal as far as a real samurai was concerned, although they are ronin and they don't have any choice anymore. But the idea of samurai, who are at the top of the social scale, interacting with farmers who are somewhere in the middle, it's really a very important thing. So the crossing of class boundaries, the strong protecting the weak, always a classic. But sometimes the strong prey upon the weak. What is the obligation that the strong have toward the weak? Another thing is, what does it mean to be a hero in difficult times? There's nothing to say that if Kanbei stays in town, even after he shaves his head, if he stays in town and says, look, you guys, I'm sorry about your plight, but 40 brigands, that's a little too much. Even if he stays in town, he has that choice. But he chooses to try to do either the heroic thing or maybe even the right thing. So you want to talk about Spike Lee? Do the right thing.
I like what you did there.
On the other side is, the farmers. These are people in perpetual hard times.
Yes, hard scrabble existence.
It rains, it doesn't rain, the crop, locusts, whatever. It's a tough, tough life. And let us have some sympathy for these people. See, notice the end of the film. The end of the film is not just the samurai go bye-bye, and Katsushiro says, Shino, I like you, but I'm off to become a samurai. The samurai leave, but the farmers are working the field in this musicalized kind of scene that goes on for a good couple of minutes. And of course, you get cross-cutting between Shino and Katsushiro, so you know that they're sort of in love, etc. But that's a moment in Kurosawa's part to take it back to the farmers who are the first people that we saw.
True.
When Takeshi Kitano did the version of Zatoichi, did you see that?
Is this the more recent version?
Yeah, Kitano pretends that he's blind and he does the blind.
I didn't see it. No,
yeah, well,
sorry.
he ends with a musical number.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and everybody says, "What the heck? What's with this music?" He even does a little tap dance.
Don't tell me he's doing a little homage to Seven Samurai.
Yes, that's exactly what he's doing. Because he said, look, I know, he said he's doing a tap dance with the wooden sandals. But he said, farmers in the old days had these work songs. So it's not that unusual. And he said, I'm just extending it. And then when I saw Seven Samurai one time after that, I said, gosh, he's right. So all of a sudden, Seven Samurai has this musical number.
It does.
That's right, but it's real.
Tell me what you think about this here, but like the ending tonally of Seven Samurai, while we're on the topic, let's just broach it a bit. That ending, it's upbeat for the farmers. It's nice to see them happy, singing, working in unison. They no longer need the samurai, which means, hey, they've learned to kind of do for themselves. And of course, the practical reason is the bad guys are gone, and you can thank the samurai for that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you hope that they can defend themselves better in the future on their own. But that ending, it suggests to me a thematic changing of the guard. Kembei's cryptic final lines reveal much, right? I mean, in the end, we lost this battle too. The victory belongs to those peasants, not to us. So we see the three surviving samurai. It's not like see ya, we've done our job, yep, we're out of here. It's more like they're kind of not shunned, but not needed. They become obsolete in a way. Like they're physically distant from the villagers that they have defended. They're preparing to depart to this unknown future. And this detached trio from the main group, with their concerned facial expressions, their body language looks resigned. It contrasts with this communal throng harvesting and singing happily in unison. So the victory has made the samurai obsolete, and now they stand as an unspoken threat to the peaceful social order established by the farmers.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant point. And what's so interesting about this is that if you think about the film taking place in the early 1600s, the vast majority of samurai movies take place in the historical era of about 1650 to 1830.
Is that right? Okay.
So now Kurosawa is, and especially with the long guns, which killed all the samurai in the movie, Kurosawa is saying they're already obsolete. And all you will do, so to speak, when you make these samurai movies is have these phony movies that are just chambara, just sword movies.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult, unless you make a movie like Seven Samurai, in which samurai protect a group of people, and then they're rendered obsolete by the very protection they provided. Otherwise, you're just making an action movie.
Yeah.
Not that I can't watch 100 million of them, but the difference between an action movie and a chambara is precisely that you've got an element of sadness, sorrow, historicity, etc., that really elevates. Now, I'm not saying anything against a genre movie. I mean, believe me, most movies are genre movies, and I love genre movies. But this isn't a genre movie precisely because of the richness that it brings forward.
Yeah, that ending, again, it signifies hope that civilization is progressing into a new era. But the tone is elegiac.
Elegiac is a good word.
It's framed from the perspective of the departing samurai. And so there's a bittersweetness there. Again, changing of the guard, end of an era, obsolescence, but yet hopeful that the throngs of civilization, the middle class or the peasants, if you will, are hopefully going to advance civilization and society. Yes, there are going to be firearms. Yes, there will be new bandits in some form. The fact that they don't need the samurai, at least right now, is a hopeful thing. It's just sad from the samurai's perspective.
Yeah, let me point out two things of a cultural nature, and that is the difference between Seven Samurai and what is the best remake, which is The Magnificent Seven, the first version. No, there's no question about it. It's a wonderful movie. But there are two differences, one in the movie and one outside. The one in the movie is that the Kikuchio character, he stays with the girl, gives up his guns and stays. That's a big difference. I think that's the Hollywood let us have a happy romantic ending.
Sure.
And then the other thing is, after The Magnificent Seven, there were 3 sequels.
That's right.
Hugh Brinner is only in the one of them called The Return of the Seven, which is weird because, 4 of them are dead. But The Return of the Seven, The Magnificent Seven Ride, and The Guns of the Magnificent Seven.
They're stretching it out as far as they can go, aren't they?
Yes, but there's no sequel to Seven Samurai. Kanbei isn't re-enlisted. Now, there's a sequel, if you will, a kind of odd sequel to Yojimbo in a movie called Sanjuro.
Sanjuro, yes.
Although, how can you have a sequel when Sanjuro takes place 100 years earlier?
The magic of the movies.
Yes, but well, it's the same character in a different setting. Whatever. That's right, the magic of the movies. But there's no sequel to Seven Samurai precisely for that reason. And Kurosawa goes on to explore other things and make other movies. And he returns to the theme once in a while of the obsolescence of the samurai in what I think is his best post-1965 movie. His career, to me, goes downhill, even qualitatively, although people like them. But a movie called Kagemusha.
Kagemusha, yeah.
A lot of people prefer Ron. I prefer Kagemusha.
Interesting.
In Kagemusha, the Lord is shot by a peasant soldier. That's a hell of a thing for a peasant soldier to shoot the Lord.
The balance of power has shifted. In the modern
and this
world,
is again
right?
same era, the same era of constant civil war. I mean, it's a good movie. It's not a great. I mean, I don't think Kurosawa made a great movie since Redbeard in 1965. But he made good movies. He made some good movies.
That's better than many filmmakers' output in their best day, right?
From 1946 to 1965, nobody made more great movies than him. If you want to think about world cinema, you could only put a few filmmakers in his class. And one of them would be Kubrick, who made half the number of movies. But, think about Kubrick. They're not all great, but they're all worth watching. And in that period of, say, 62.
Probably, if you argue, through The Shining, but at
Through
least
The Shining,
through Barry
I would
Lyndon.
argue.
Yeah. So a good 13, 14 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I'd
don't
say
forget, let's be honest, the 50s, Hitchcock is dominating in that decade.
And then I would say Hitchcock. But look at Hitchcock. Hitchcock is of a piece. And when he tries to break out of it, like The Trouble with Harry, it's not very good.
I'll still take it, though. He will always be my favorite, but to each his own, I mean, there's no shame in having Kurosawa number 2 or 3 in my book, I'll tell you that.
Well, yes. No, I taught a class in Hitchcock. And when I taught a class in Hitchcock, I showed 15 Hitchcock movies. Starting with his late silent movie in Britain. And I had a great appreciation for Mr. Alfred.
I'm sure you did.
Believe me, he is a filmmaker of filmmakers. No, I agree. And I say, Kurosawa, if you don't agree about Kurosawa, at least you agree that Kurosawa, Hitchcock, Kubrick, Ford, maybe Bergman.
Yeah, Fellini.
Maybe.
Yeah. Again, it's a matter of taste and opinion and so forth. And it's not like you can quantify. But...
I know, unless you make up a scale.
Yeah. But again, it's all subjective, right? It's to each his own. But talk about the contemporaries in this wheelhouse, this particular period of time, like you're saying, like through the 50s to maybe the mid-60s or so. You've got a lot of great filmmakers and all-time great films, too.
Well, in Japan, they call that the Golden Age.
Yeah. Mizoguchi, Ozu.
And many others. Not in 54, but by 57, 58, the Japanese were making more movies than anybody in the world, including India, which, has 16 languages they make movies in. So you can't even count them.
Right.
But they were making more movies than Hollywood, more movies than India. And so within this morass, if you will, there's just dozens of great movie directors, movie stars, writers, cameramen, supporting actors. I mean, it is a golden age. The more you see, and even their mediocre movies are pretty good.
That's the point. Even the middling efforts are cream of the crop in any other time.
And when you get to the post Yojimbo samurai movies, of which Zatoichi is one, and do you know the Lone Wolf and Cub movies?
It's been a blind spot. I've got to check it out.
You got to watch 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3, maybe 4, 5, and 6. All right, forget it. But 1, 2, 3, and 4, especially 1, 2, and 4.
All right, you convinced me.
And that's like the beginning is Yojimbo and the ending is the Lone Wolf and Cub. And in between, there's just so much good stuff by directors like Kurosawa, Kobayashi, Gosha, Okamoto, Mizumi. I mean, this just goes on and on.
Incredible period. I want to finish up the thought on themes here. I want to
Yeah.
dovetail back to what you were saying about the social order, structure, class, distinctions. I think a major theme, riffing on what you were saying, is performing according to or in defiance of social roles and class structure. So to me, Seven Samurai examines the extent to which our identity is maybe predestined or predetermined by society and class, and how diligence and determination, fearlessness, they can help you break through these barriers. And that's demonstrated by Kikuchio ultimately meriting the rank of samurai, although he loses his life in the process.
Yeah.
And Kikuchio is really crucial here. Kenbei deserves all the attention and respect, appreciation. He's the head of the samurai group, but Kikuchio, he's a surrogate for the audience, right? He represents a common person who aspires to be something greater than he is. He's flawed and imperfect, but he's capable of showing a range of emotions, from anger to humor to impudence. He also embodies rebellion against social conventions and customs. To me, he's the fulcrum between the peasants and the samurai. He exhibits traits representational of each side and is the most relatable and well-rounded character in the entire story.
I agree with you 100%. And I think once he comes in, although he comes in pretty early, he is the audience surrogate because we see the samurai in some ways through his eyes. Same thing with Katsushiro. These two guys, because he's not yet a samurai, he wants to be, taken on board by Kanbei. So you have these two guys who are trying to get to this other place, and we see the samurai through their eyes. Katsushiro's blind worship, if you will, of Kyuzo, and Kikuchio, who loves and hates the samurai, are both very, very crucial.
Absolutely.
Let us think about Japanese society, especially in the 1950s, in which there is still a lot of class boundaries. Kurosawa's grandparents were samurai. His father, I think, was also in the samurai class, except by that time the samurai had been abolished. If they hadn't been abolished, his father would have been a samurai, and he thought of himself as a samurai since he was an army gym teacher. It's kind of weird, but anyway.
Everybody's got an origin story.
Well, gym teachers, how they are, but there is a difficulty in stepping out of your lane in Japan. Even if you don't think about social class, you think about the old time Japanese expression, the nail that sticks up is pounded down. So I think society has changed, but in the 50s, the Japanese society is still pretty traditional.
Yeah, but what's interesting, David, is that the fact that this farmer's son transforms into a valorous samurai by the end of the film, it demonstrates that Bushido, which is this honorable code of ethics by which a samurai lives, it maybe has less to do with class and social standing than personal character and integrity.
I do agree, and that's what the movie's about, right? The samurai who fight for the farmers, personal character and integrity. You put it brilliantly, but as I say, doing the right thing, being a hero, protecting the weak, these are all things that some samurai reject and some group of men accept.
Yeah, and it begs the question, why do the Seven Samurai take this job for virtually no pay? It's a fair question, right? Like, really, in the real world, even if you're at the 1600 or thereabouts, really, what's in it for them,
That's
right?
Right. I agree.
The answer is the same reason the bandits continue to attack even though they know the village is well defended. It's because they perform the duties they've been ascribed by their social caste.
No, I would have to say that the samurais, they step out of their lane.
Well, they do once after they accept it, don't
Oh,
they?
yeah. Yeah, after they accept it, right.
But they have to accept it, and the fact that, okay, why? What's in it for them? So it's not just pity, right? It's not just, I'm going to feel sorry for the farmers, so I'll help their cause. Isn't it that it's kind of accepted, even though they're loners, wandering, they no longer have a kingdom or a
clan,
a clan to represent. It's kind of like understood in their social order. They perform the duties they've been ascribed by their social caste. But I think what you're saying is that once they accept it, things change.
No, I'm saying there's nothing in Bushido that says protect the weak. There's nothing, there is in the Chinese tradition of wuxia, of the knight errant. But Ronin and samurai, as such, are not knight errants. Samurai who are in clans have no obligation to protect the weak. And Ronin only would do it for various reasons, including getting some food. But there's nothing in the code of Bushido that says, study hard, learn poetry, and protect the weak. It's not a knight errancy. And in fact, Bushido was, I don't want to say invented, but whatever it was, it was written down to keep a clansman and his loyalty to his lord. That's the loyalty. The loyalty is hierarchical. It's not subarchical. I don't think that's a word, but there's nothing in it. And so the samurai who accept for various reasons. And somebody makes the case that the samurai who accept for the wrong reasons in some ways are the ones that die. Kyuzo, so that he can perfect his swordsmanship, and Heihachi because he thinks it would be fun. I'm not saying it's because they're flawed, but whatever it is, they all have their reasons. Oh yeah, Gorobe. People would say that Gorobe accept because he's interested in Kanbei. And Kanbei says, "Well, thank you." And of course, he has the great hand motion over his once hairy head.
I love that. It's so great. I'm going to refer to that in a moment.
Anyway, yeah. So Gorobe is intrigued by Kanbei. Kikuchiyo is just trying to get some heroism under his belt.
Right.
But whatever the case is, they do step a little bit aside out of their strict social category.
You're right. But it's a story about breaking with tradition, and this is the second part of the point I was trying to make, which is the peasants, they're forced to veer from their assumed path in life by doing what? By fighting back.
That's right.
And the samurai choose to break from their predicted pattern by defending the farmers despite not being fairly compensated. And these two separate classes, they have to deviate from the norm and work together as one to defeat the bandits. So to me, the overriding point or theme here is breaking with tradition.
Oh, I can go with that.
Yeah, but I totally see what you're saying too. You're absolutely right. Everybody has their own reasons. But the film also underscores the dangers and the downsides of class division, the class structure we were talking about. The farmers are forced to hire and also kill samurai. So there's kind of an irony there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The peasant daughter and the samurai must never mix or the girl loses her honor. That's kind of what happens. They do mix. But Kikuchiyo must conceal the shameful fact that he was the son of a farmer. So there are ironies about class division that abound in Seven Samurai. Though the bandits are eventually defeated, the samurai have lost, as they say. The farmers prevail, but now they don't want any armed samurai around because they represent a threat to their established order. So again, Kurosawa and his collaborators are really tapping into class distinctions, the differentiation between your caste or your class.
Well, I think what Kurosawa also is interested in is in a hero who's willing to sacrifice for the greater good.
Yes.
I mean, that's what heroes are.
Absolutely.
In all cultures.
That's the other crucial subtext, David, which is the role of the individual in society. You know, before the film was made, Japan, it's occupied by Allied forces for, as you said, until 52 or thereabouts, right? So once the occupiers leave the country, they suffer a bit of an identity crisis. There are traditions of rigid honor and duty and cultural precepts that view the individual as a cog in the machinery of society.
Yep.
And the critics would say that led them down the path to ruin in World War II. And then Westerners coming into the country, they infuse this notion of the value of the individual, which clashes with long-standing socialistic beliefs in each person's duty to serve collective society, does it not?
Yes.
And so beginning with Seven Samurai, Kurosawa's films increasingly emphasize a more flexible humanism ethos and an emphasis on individuality that was more characteristic of Western culture. And so this film demonstrates that struggle between these two ideologies of Japanese traditionalism versus Western modernism. And it examines the negative repercussions and ultimate futility of the previously dominant, inflexible Japanese ethic of acting on social obligations and performing according to social expectations.
Yep, Kurosawa was very much accused, if you will, of being westernized, partly or maybe even totally for his individualistic, humanistic view of society. And that the individual has an obligation to step outside and step up, and that it's too easy not to. And so Kurosawa discusses how hard it is to step up, some of the consequences of stepping up, But in our new post-war world, we need social classes to act together along with individuals to take a stand. You need both social cohesion and individualism.
Yeah, because while Seven Samurai values the role of the individual, as you're saying, it also stresses the importance of coordinated communal action.
Exactly.
Because, Kembe, he proves that only by cooperating constructively as this disciplined team with assigned roles, only then can the samurai and the farmers defeat their adversaries together. So, we see the samurai carefully train the peasants. They enforce strict rules designed to prevent anyone from going rogue, right? They make sure that nobody abandons their post or behaves selfishly at the expense of the entire village. And ultimately, it's this well-organized collectivism and adherence to sound tactical strategy that ensures victory, right? Because although not everything goes according to plan and the group suffers more losses than expected, it's this collective action that wins the day.
Well, and also in this movie, Kanbei, or even Kyuzo, is not going up against 40 villains. It takes collective action. It takes planning. It takes a village. Literally, it takes a village.
Yes. But this is also part of the deliciousness of the Seven Samurai, which is Kembe's defensive strategizing, his military maneuvers.
Oh, yeah, fascinating.
Such a fascinating facet. You recall what he says, this is the nature of war. By protecting others, you save yourself. If you only think of yourself, you will destroy yourself.
Yes.
And then he says, every great castle needs a breach. Draw the enemy there and attack. You can't win by defense alone. There's his line, there's nothing heroic about selfishly grabbing for glory. Listen to me, war is not fought alone.
Exactly, nice.
So Kembe, he's this brilliant military tactician who favors a war of attrition, right? He gates off one village access point, he floods another, he leads this ambush on bandits in their lair to lessen their numbers. He concentrates his forces around the majority of the homes at the expense of those 3 vulnerable huts on the outskirts. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
He allows one bandit in at a time so they can more easily kill their foes. They can systematically improve their odds. And for that last battle, what does he say? Well, better we fight it out till we're spent. So we're going to let all 13 in and just have it out.
And I always thought it was interesting because I have seen so many sword movies, I call them sword movies, whatever they are, that, there's only 13 of them.
It's not like the Battle of Thermopylae, right? 300 against 2 zillion people.
Exactly. Or, it's not like Zatoichi, who can easily dispense 13 guys who circle him, right?
No, but it's more realistic.
It's much more realistic. And of course, they have bows and arrows, they have spears, and they have guns. It's not so easy. And that's why it's such a great movie.
Yes.
There's something at stake, and it's not easy. Think about this, though. Kanbei is talking about modern warfare. Even though there was the Civil War, and even though there's a historical element, you had thousands of guys attacking each other. But I think that Kurosawa was really talking in 1954 about World War II.
Interesting.
And so he's talking about modern warfare. And America did the same thing in its war movies. Most of its war movies, ours, are about groups because individuals can't fight a war in modern warfare. And again, it's very important that all the samurai die by rifle. You can't fight these guys with swords. They're too good.
No.
You can blow them up.
And it speaks to the 20th century and the rising nuclear fear, or just the way that war can be remote controlled to some extent by newer technology.
Oh, I think that's Kurosawa was very much concerned with nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I Live in Fear is all about. And I think Rashomon is about that too. Mm-hmm. The way in which the nuclear world has changed our values. And now what are we going to do? And I love the scene where Kanbei is going around drawing maps. Well, let's see. I've got the north here, and here's a 4-hour. It just strikes me as
he's
funny.
crossing off the open circles on the map as he goes along, and you're kind of trying to keep track of yourself.
Exactly.
And it's not easy. It's not easy.
But I love the old guy though in the water mill. Right? He says, "I'm not going in town. Forget it."
Right. Yep, he's going to stick to his guns.
He stays in the watermill, right? He don't care.
Yeah. But one final theme that really struck me, the multi-natured complexity of human beings, which is under Kurosawa's microscope here, because on its surface, Yeah, Seven Samurai is a black and white movie, but it's also a black and white morality tale about good versus evil. It can be simplified if you want to think about it that way. But to me, David, this is an inaccurate characterization because there are many shades of gray at play in this narrative. Kikuchio's scolding of the samurai for their hypocritical views on the farmers, it reveals that there are two sides to every story. There's a duality within human nature that can seesaw between selflessness and selfishness, between vice and virtue. And that clandestine affair between Shino and Katsushiro ends in a one-night stand, right? They're denounced by some as immoral and improper, but they're defended by others as a gesture of young love in a time of duress.
Oh, yeah.
And then as a third example, Kikuchio leaves his post to steal the firearm, as we discussed. This is a brave yet irresponsible act that results in one less bandit, true, but it likely leads to several farmer deaths, maybe even yohais.
Yes.
And then Rikichi, he's deserving of our sympathies due to the abduction and eventual suicide of his wife. We feel bad for him, but he harbors this unexpressed rage, and Heihachi tries to get Rikichi to talk about what's bothering him.
Yeah.
He expresses this bloodlust for torturous violence, Rikichi, upon that captured enemy who begs for his life. But interestingly, it's not Rikichi who metes out the vengeance in that scene. It's the supposedly feeble, helpless old woman villager who kills that bandit.
Remember, Heihachi's killed at the bandit's hideout, trying to rescue Rikichi.
That's true.
So Rikichi's sort of selfishness has cost the life of one samurai. But that old woman, oh my God, that scene is incredible.
Yes. But these and other examples, they show how both the peasants and the samurai are capable of positive and negative acts.
Oh, sure.
That's my point.
No, I agree. I don't think there was a movie ever in Japanese cinema. I mean, I've never seen one in which something like Kikuchio castigates the samurai as a class. Not to mention, the ones that are angry because the farmers have killed and stolen samurai armor.
Yeah, and up to that point, you're thinking Kikuchio is just this braggadocious, buffoonish character who I'm not going to put a lot of stock in him. What does he know?
Right.
He knows a lot. What he's speaking is the truth.
He is, but I don't know that there was ever a Japanese movie that quite did that before.
Interesting. All right, we're almost near the finish line, David. Hang in there. We're around in the corner.
Around the corner, coming in the home stretch. Okay.
It's an epic discussion of an epic movie. Let's put it that way.
There you go.
So we are sending 70th birthday wishes to Seven Samurai. Birthdays are a time for giving presents, only it's the fans who continue to receive the gifts when a cherished film marks a milestone year. That's my contention. So what is this movie's greatest gift to viewers, David?
Besides that, it's the greatest film of all time.
That's a pretty good gift. But come on, I'm going to challenge you. What else?
No, it's just a great movie about men at war. And I mean, that's what I would say. If there's been hundreds of war movies. We still think about war. We glamorize war many times. This is the greatest movie about men at war.
Simple, sweet. I love it.
Yeah.
So here's my take, okay? I'm going to be a little more long-winded, but I'll try to keep it concise. I think Seven Samurai's most generous gift is also its greatest strength, and that is its universality. I talked about this before, because it's this ever-vibrant, easily comprehensible text. It translates effortlessly across languages, across cultures, across eras, and it's little surprise that this tale has been adapted so many times across the decades, as I said, in several different countries. It can be flexed to fit multiple genres. And yet, David, despite the simplicity, despite the malleability of that narrative, the wealth of captivating characters and the complex moral themes, they keep us enthralled whenever we revisit the movie. If I were to equate it to, let's say, an oil painting, the broad brushstrokes continue to pop on this canvas, right? Including the memorable character introductions, the enthralling battle planning scenes, the immersive combat sequences, and the satisfying subplots, as we said, involving Katsushiro and Rikichi. But it's the smaller fine touches on that canvas that matter too. From, as you were saying, like the endearing way that Kanbei rubs the stubbly crown of his head, or as a contrast, the sheepish manner with which Kikuchio scratches the side of his face. He does that a lot. To the breath vapors that are emitted from the actors and reminding us of the cold shooting conditions. The gleeful shouts of the kids who comprise Kikuchio's fan club. All the way to the fury with which the wind whips against Heihachi's flag, this stalwart banner that, like the heroes represented in its markings, defies the elements. It rouses the spirit through its elevated presence. So Seven Samurai is many kinds of master paintings in one to me. It's a deep focus landscape. It's a portrait in triplicate, if you think about the three main characters. It's a still life of sorts that depicts a restless group awaiting its enemies. And it's a real life that captures vivid action across multiple planes and perspectives. Following through with this metaphor, among the esteemed gallery of Kurosawa's works, this is the piece de resistance that occupies an entire wall within its own well-visited wing of the museum.
Well, I take back what I said, and I'm gonna say ditto.
I'm not trying to outshine you at all, but I thought long and hard. I actually was thinking about this for the better part of the day yesterday. How do I answer this question? What is the greatest gift? And I kept thinking about it as a masterpiece, an oil painting of some sort. And how am I going to equate that?
Think about it as a masterpiece. I think you've said it well. I couldn't agree with what you said any stronger. It's just a great movie.
Yep. Enough said.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, David. Last question. Promise. Is there anything you're currently working on that, listeners should know about? What's in the works?
Well, as I said, I'm doing a collection of essays on Keisuke Kinoshita, who was a pal of Kurosawa's. They were 2 years apart in age. They made movies exactly the same time frame. Keisuke Kinoshita's famous film is 24 Eyes, and also the color cinemascope, The Ballad of Narayama. And so I'm just trying to bring a little more attention to an underrated director, considering that Kurosawa at least has gotten a good deal of attention, but Kinoshita much less so. But if anyone is listening to me that has the Criterion Channel, for some strange reason, the Criterion Channel has 40 Kinoshita movies.
Wow.
So if you want to spend a few weeks watching good movies.
Yeah, that would be about right. A few weeks.
Yeah, Kinoshita. So anyway, that's what I'm working on, and it's almost finished. And I've been having some fun working on this. He's a great director, but never made any samurai or sword movies.
When can we expect the finished work?
I'd say about 18 months.
Okay. Yep. It's still gestating. I get it.
Maybe 15 months, but no. Okay.
Maybe sometime next year is what you're saying?
Definitely.
Gotcha. Anything else?
That's it.
That's enough. Enough to keep you busy.
Just enjoying watching movies.
Absolutely. Are you watching the new Shogun? Curious.
I haven't watched it yet because I want to watch it with my wife, and she's been too busy.
Gotcha. Well, it'll be there waiting for you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I saw the original.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, the original with Toshiro Mifune, yes.
I saw it way back when. Mr. Richard Chamberlain.
1980. That was a big hit on NBC. That was back in the day when they were adapting James Clavell novels left and right.
James Clavell, yeah.
We're getting old in the tooth. But anyway, congratulations, David, on conducting the official longest interview with me over the past 6 years of this podcast. You broke the record here.
Oh, great.
You were such a trooper. I'm so grateful for your time and expertise. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, tremendous stuff there from the go-to expert on all things Kurosawa and Seven Samurai. Domo arigato, David. I loved every minute of that talk with you. Now let's turn our attention to esteemed film critic and Japanese cinema connoisseur, Stuart Galbraith. We roll out the Cineversary red carpet now for Stuart Galbraith IV, a widely followed cinema historian, film critic, essayist, and former film archivist for USC and Warner Brothers, who lives in Japan and has authored several books on Japanese cinema, including The Emperor and the Wolf, The Lives and Films of Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune. Stuart, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, wow, what a film, right? Seven Samurai. I mean, I don't know where this ranks for you. It's very high for me. It is my all-time favorite world cinema, foreign international film. Do you recall when you first watched it, and what impression did it make on you?
Well, I should go back first to say that I think the first Kurosawa movie I saw was Yojimbo, which I saw when I was still a junior high school student. I was attending without any credit, a cinema class at a local community college, and so my first experience was in the 70s, seeing a 16 millimeter print of Yojimbo, and after that I saw a number of Kurosawa films, but oddly enough, I don't think I saw Seven Samurai until Criterion's CAV format Laserdisc. I don't know if you remember those, but those were laser discs that were 30 minutes per side, so that you could do a freeze frame option on them. So, you can imagine a 3.5 hour movie, you're flipping discs
Yeah.
constantly. But it was, an amazing experience seeing it for the first time. And I was so bowled over by it. I probably that first year I watched that laser disc, 4 or 5 times in the first
Well, I'm
year.
trying to place the date. So would that have been the early 90s?
Probably, yeah, late 80s, early 90s, something like that. And
Wow.
and also not just the film, but the audio commentary track on that laser disc.
So they did have a track on there. And do you recall who it was?
Oh, I definitely do. It was a guy named Michael Jeck, and I still think it's one of the best audio commentaries ever done for a movie, and it was just really informative and insightful and observant.
Hmm.
And I believe the commentary track was carried over for the eventual DVD and Blu-ray reissues.
I think you're correct. I don't know if I've listened to it. I've owned a copy on Blu-ray for quite a while. I'm sure I've poured over it many times. It just doesn't ring a bell. But wow, aren't they just so fantastic, those commentaries? They're like film school 101 right into your ears. And especially, I'm imagining, you getting into a great film like this in the early 90s and just the luxury, the flexibility with which to hear a studied voice who can share details about it, right? And
Yeah,
so did
yeah.
that inspire you at all in what you do today?
Oh,
Just in
enormously.
terms of, your ability to really go dig deep into a film classic and have it readily accessible on home video. I mean, those were the days, right? And now today, I mean, maybe it's easy to take for granted because it's rather ubiquitous. And of course, we've shifted to streaming in many cases, but cinephiles, they still hold on to those criterions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, and I've been commenting on this recently, I think that those early laser discs were really the golden age of audio commentaries generally, because you had people like Ron Haver and Leonard Maltin and Roger Ebert and various people doing them, and of course Donald Ritchie was the go-to guy for Japanese cinema for many years until his
Yes.
death.
I had the luxury of interviewing Stephen Prince for Rashomon a few years ago when we celebrated its
Right.
50th anniversary, I'm sorry, 70th anniversary. Unfortunately, he has passed away too.
Right, right. So those were definitely a major inspiration for me in my film studies and research. So and in fact, I think I quote part of Michael Jeck's commentary, or certainly reference it in my book, The Emperor and the Wolf.
Is that right? Okay. And I have to ask, I mean, I told you this this place is pretty high for me. So how about you? Where does Seven Samurai, if you were to kind of give it a ranking, even just in a general sense, not necessarily numerical, how high does it place for you among A, Kurosawa's filmography, and B, maybe the very best of Japanese cinema?
Well, for something like that, I always refer to a quote by Francis Ford Coppola when he was once interviewed by Japanese television to name his favorite Kurosawa film. And his response was, well, I mean, all of them are so great. I mean, which ones are the masterpieces and which ones are merely very, very excellent?
So true.
And that's kind of how I feel about it as well. I think if you were to say Seven Samurai was the greatest film of all time, or if it was in one of the top 10, I certainly wouldn't argue that point. But I also think you could put, I mean, Kurosawa directed, I think, 30 films. You could probably put half of those would qualify on any top 10 lists. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly things like Rashomon and
Ikiru,
Ikiru and Throne of Blood and
High
Yojimbo and
and
Here's
Low.
Urasawa and
Yeah, I mean, you
Ran,
could
and
go on and on.
it goes on and on.
Exactly.
So,
It's an impossible question to answer. I get it. But yeah, I mean, it's easy for me, although it did battle with Rashomon quite a while. I kind of teeter totter between those two. Rashomon is such a game changer in so many ways.
mm,
But my goodness, I love a good, thrilling, epic adventure yarn. And boy, just the fact that this story is so ubiquitous in pop culture now and it's been remade so many times, I think it tells you a lot about the translatability, the universality of a Seven Samurai, and how it can be, newly discovered by new generations and rediscovered by older ones too, time and again. I mean, it's just always a treat to watch it. So, how about this rephrase of a question? Is it among the Kurosawa works that you revisit the most often? Does it have infinite rewatchability for you?
Oh, I think it does because I think it's such a rich film that you can not only admire just how great it is in pretty much every way, but also I think every time you watch it, you see new things.
Sure.
I think one of the interesting things about the film is because it is, after all, about seven samurai. There's seven characters there, and then there's about an equal number of important characters in the village, the various farmers. And so often throughout the film, in the frame, there's usually at least three or four characters at one time. So when you rewatch the film, it's sometimes interesting to look at characters that aren't talking at a particular moment and to watch their reactions because you can gain insight on these other characters at
Yes.
the same time. I mean, they're all working together on their characters, so there's always something interesting to
It's
see.
a great point. Absolutely. Like that's one of the umpteen reasons why, if you see it on subsequent reviews, yeah, you're paying more attention to things on the periphery, maybe some of the smaller lines, smaller characters, even some of the facial expressions that you might miss the first few go rounds. And the first watch, it's a little tough, I have to admit, not being fluent, of course, in Japanese or even that steeped in Japanese culture or movies, way back when, just keeping track of the characters and the names.
Right,
And
right.
of course, there are foreign films with even more subtitles and more kind of reading to do, and I don't have any problem with that. But this is a film where you really got to pay attention and kind of keep some of the characters straight. But all the more reason to go back and rewatch Seven Samurai. And then once you get everybody kind of straightened and you know who's who and you kind of get a feel for the names too, it becomes that much easier and more pleasurable to revisit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things is that, in the first and most famous remake, The Magnificent Seven, one of the things I don't really care about it is that the Mexican peasants are all pretty much colorless and generic
Generic,
for the
right?
most part.
Hmm.
And what Kurosawa did for Seven Samurai is he created this whole, in Japan, they have these family registries where they kind of create this family tree and who's related to who and where does each person live. Kurosawa did that for the entire village in the film, so that even the minor bit players and extras had a particular identity where they were related to this person and not that person, and they lived in this particular farmhouse. And so he really strived to create individual people and not just this mob of peasant farmers.
Yeah, I think that makes a difference. That seeps through, and you feel it's a lived-in universe. Obviously, it's very it's very gritty. This is farmland.
Right, right.
This is 17th century, I guess, early 17th century Japan. Civil War, and it just feels like hard scrabble existence to the upteenth degree. But you're right. You have a feeling that even the smaller characters have major backstories that we can only kind of skim
Mm.
over
Right, right.
or guess at, and it doesn't feel cardboardish. It feels like these are real characters, real people, not just stock characters or archetypes.
Right, right. And he even on his period films, Kurosawa insisted that his actors wear their clothes for, weeks or months ahead of shooting, wear their clothes to bed and that kind of thing, so that by the time they were shooting, they were lived in and they were like a second skin,
And I'm sure you know much more about the backstory of the making of Seven Samurai. I've just begun to learn. I'll steep myself in the Criterion Collection disc. But, I mean, they're shooting in very cold, harsh conditions. And you see the vapor coming out of these actors' mouths, and half of them are half naked.
Yeah, yeah.
They filmed for a very long time. I forget what I read. I mean, months and months. And it had to take a major toll on this crew and cast. But it speaks to what you were saying in terms of everybody is so invested. You just feel it. Everybody is really into it. And from what I read, Kurosawa, you can vouch for this, I'm sure, or expand on it if you choose. But like he could be tough. He could be a taskmaster, and he really knew what he wanted, and he demanded it of his cast and crew. But boy, did it deliver. I mean, he got what he wanted because you really feel like they're eking out this very difficult existence and subsisting off of meager means and trying to survive one day to the next. But for most of the movie, it looks pretty tough.
Brutal, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what do you know about just the making of it briefly? Anything you want to share in terms of any research you've done in your book? Did you learn anything interesting?
Well, it was a very unusual production in the sense that, obviously film production pretty much ground to a halt during the last year of World War II.
Mm.
And then there was several years of turmoil and recovery. And by 1953, 54, when they were shooting Seven Samurai, things had picked up speed and it was returning to normal, and the major film studios were cranking out movies. But obviously, this was an unusual film because it was twice the length, more than twice the length of a typical Japanese feature film. And it ended up costing a huge amount of money by Japanese standards.
I think I read that it was the most expensive production to date in Japan, or am I wrong about that?
It was about that.
Yeah.
I mean, Musashi Miyamoto, which was Hiroshi Inagaki's film, also with Mifune,
Mhm.
that was shot in color, and so was more expensive, and it was a big scale period film that cost about the same, I think a little bit less,
Mm.
but Seven Samurai came in to the equivalent of about 550,000 US
At the
dollars
time, yeah. Hmm.
at the time. And that was at a time when a typical Japanese 90-minute feature film probably cost, 70, $80,000. So that was a lot of
And I can
money.
only imagine the production schedule, the actual filming had to be a very long time. There's no way they're rushing something like this.
No, no, it took many, many
Yeah.
months. And then Kurosawa ran through the budget and they had to stop filming for a while. And for a while, Toho, the studio, was considering just scrapping the whole
Oh,
film or
wow. I didn't
trying
know
to
that. Hmm.
salvage it in some other way, editing together what had been shot up to that point. And then they finally gave the go ahead for him to finish it. But you were talking about how cold it was. The final battle scene was, in fact, basically shot in winter
Yeah.
time, and they were, using fire trucks and spraying the village set so it'd be all cold and muddy and everything. And as you say, I mean, Mifune particularly is running around half naked
Yes.
in this. So
Yeah, it's just astounding. Like you could tell, they really suffered for their art, and what you see on screen, it feels so viscerally real. What do you admire, Stuart, about the film's narrative construction? It's a 207-minute runtime.
one of the things that's really great about Seven Samurai is that half the first half of the movie is really introducing the characters, introducing the
Hmm.
farmers, introducing the bandits very briefly at the beginning, and gradually one by one introducing the samurai. And then they go to the village, and we see the initial relationship problems between the samurai and the farmers, and we have Takashi Shimura's character as the leader of the samurai, going around the village and talking about the defenses in the different parts of the village, and it's all set up. And I think that's really ingenious because what it does is, by the time the first big battles between the farmers and the samurai and the bandits gets underway, we know all these
Yes.
characters and we know where everybody is and we know where things are in relationship to everything else. So it makes the second half of the film incredibly exciting because of all that setup. I mean, it's sort of, you could say the same thing about the original 1933 King Kong. I mean, what's so great about that is the whole first half of the movie, there's no Kong, there's no
Right.
dinosaurs or anything.
Hmm.
It's all set up and building that mystery.
Yes,
And
and introducing those characters, as you said. Hmm.
right. And it's kind of, it's interesting now because so many high concept movies feel the need to have just one huge action set piece
Right.
right after another. And to me, it makes everything so boring because you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Roger Ebert has said it, no great movie is long enough and no bad movie ends soon enough. And this is a movie where, again, I just rewatched it again the other night, and we're in the climactic rain battle, the final conflict, and I know it's coming to an end, and I don't want it to end.
Right.
I just want it to keep going. I want to think there's more scenes to discover. There's more backstories to unfold. There's more things that I forgot about. I never forget about it because I just know this movie so well. I've seen it so many times. I'm not an expert, but what I'm saying is I always wish that there's more. Somehow they're going to find a lost reel or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it falls into that handful of movies that are basically perfect. And one of the things that binds the greatest movies ever made is I think every moment has a purpose. It's there for a reason. It's giving explanations and backstories to characters. It's showing, contrasts and similarities and drawing parallels or whatever it's doing.
Yeah. There's no fat. There are no
There's no
superfluous
fat.
scenes. There's nothing you could really trim out and say, yeah, that's just kind of padding. We don't need it.
Yeah.
And it's astounding to me that they did release a shorter, truncated cut initially. I get it that it's, 1954, 55, and internationally you worry about, audiences getting restless and turning over more theater goers for every viewing. I understand different times, but wow, I can't imagine cutting a minute of this movie.
Right. I completely agree. And even the much shorter version, which I think was around 2.5 hours, even that was criticized for being too long.
Right. I think Bosley Crowther in particular
Right.
criticized that particular point. But again, different times.
Different times. And I think also once you start cutting the film, you're throwing everything out of
Oh,
whack,
totally.
in terms of the characterizations. And I think, I mentioned earlier how I dislike how generic the Mexican peasants are in Magnificent Seven. And I think part of the reason for that is because the people who made that film probably only saw the short version of Seven Samurai. So they only had the short version to go on. And a lot of the stuff that was cut was material involving the peasant farmers.
For a long time. We didn't get the full vision, the full realization,
Right.
and now we have it, and that's fantastic. So let's talk about the cast because I can't think of a more perfectly cast movie. I have to admit, I don't know a lot of these Japanese actors. I've seen their faces, of course, Shimura, of course, Mifune, and so many other Kurosawa classics, and some of the other ones who I'm not as familiar with their names, but seen their faces. I mean, this is really where it all hinges. You miscast those roles, and it just doesn't work as well. And I don't know what it is, but Shimura just absolutely looks perfect in this movie. Everything he does, all the little mannerisms, the rubbing of his head,
Right.
and the brilliant military tactician aspect of his personality, just the little mannerisms. And then on the other hand, you have Mifune, who at first glance you might think, oh, he's hamming it up, he's overacting, but my goodness, is he giving us a range that I didn't really appreciate until probably the third or fourth viewing what he's doing here, and it really is astounding. I'm a sucker for movies that can really move you emotionally. This most recent rewatch, I actually shed a few tears on a couple of occasions, did Mifune.
Yeah.
What do you think about the cast?
Oh, well, it's like everything else. I think it's pretty much perfect. And Kurosawa, during this time, he built up a stock company of actors that he used over and over again. So besides Takashi Shimura and Toshiro Mifune, you have actors like Kamatari Fujiwara, who plays the suspicious peasant farmer who's worried about his daughter.
Right.
He's in just about every Kurosawa film. Bokuzen Hidari, who's the sort of sad-faced old peasant who sort of specialized in playing sort of comical old men characters. He's in almost every Kurosawa film, and on and on. And then some of the other actors were more associated with Japanese theater, like Minoru Chiaki, who came back and did basically the C-3PO character in The Hidden Fortress.
Okay.
But he was kind of more theater than film. And Isao Kimura, who plays the young, handsome disciple samurai, he was primarily a theater actor, although he did some films too. But I think, as you say, I mean, they're all perfectly cast, and Shimura is just so wonderful, and he's just wonderful in everything. I mean, you can see him in the popular Tora-san film series. He plays the father of one of the main characters. He's wonderful in that. He did a couple, one or two, at least one that I can think of, baseball melodramas in
Wow.
Japan, and he's great in that.
Mm,
I mean, he was terrific in everything. And one of the you mentioned one of the things about his mannerisms. I think one of the really clever little touches in Seven Samurai is how at the beginning he shaves his head, and then over the course of the story, we can sort of mark the passage of time by his hair slowly growing back.
yeah.
This amazing attention to continuity that
Yes.
you would never normally
That
do.
begs the question, do you happen to know, was it shot pretty much in continuity? That's pretty hard to do, I would imagine, especially a film of this length.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I
Hmm.
think they probably tried to do as much of it as possible
Hmm.
in continuity, but I'm sure they also had to, they were going back between the location, which was in an area called Gotemba, and I'm sure they were doing a fair amount of stuff in the studio, and obviously you're dealing with the weather and everything else.
So you've written extensively about Japanese cinema and the partnership between, in particular, Kurosawa and Mifune. So what can you tell us, Stuart, more about this director and that long-running partnership that you learned when researching and writing, your book on these topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those great cinematic partnerships like John Ford and John Wayne, or Martin Scorsese and De Niro. Mifune was a very unusual actor in the sense that he sort of came into it accidentally. After the end of World War II, he was looking for employment. His father had had a photography studio in China, so he thought maybe he could get a job in the camera department at Toho Studios. And so he went there for an audition, and they ended up sending him to the New Face acting auditions instead. And, he had no training, but he had this kind of raw power that, in particular, a director named Kajiro Yamamoto, who was Kurosawa's mentor, recognized. And very quickly, Kurosawa and one of his contemporaries, another director named Senkichi Taniguchi, began putting Mifune in their films, and they recognized he had this great talent. He was unusual in the sense that he, at that time, the trend in Japanese cinema was for kind of pretty boy actors who had a certain exotic look. People like Koji Tsuruta and Ryo Ikebe and actors like that. And Mifune was very kind of coarse working class. But that lent itself really well to so many Kurosawa films. I mean, probably my personal favorite Kurosawa film for the last number of years is High and Low. And in that, he plays this guy who had started out in the backstory before the film as a guy who made shoes in a
That's
factory
right.
and eventually came up and became this wealthy shoe company executive. And that was basically Mifune. I mean, he started out with nothing. He literally came back from the war with the clothes on his back and nothing else, and became this very wealthy celebrity. And he always kind of felt a little uncomfortable about that, and uncomfortable in his role as kind of ambassador to Japan because of his fame. But he did trust Kurosawa's judgment, and Kurosawa gave him a long leash and let him go with his
Yeah, I was going to
instincts.
ask, like, what was the relationship like? Was there a synergy? Did they often butt heads, but yet, find a way through their differences? What was it like?
I think they got along quite well during the productions of the films because, again, they just trusted each other. Kurosawa had a reputation, like many other directors, like John Ford and Otto Preminger and others, who tended to pick out one actor in the cast and just treat him mercilessly. And in the case of Seven Samurai, it wasn't Mifune, it was the actor Yoshio Inaba, who plays one of the chubby samurai.
Yeah, Gorobi, I think is his name.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if it was his film debut or what. He had only done maybe one or two other films before, I'm not sure. But he was just treated mercilessly. But Mifune, Kurosawa pretty much left alone because he kind of knew that Mifune would deliver exactly what he needed and often would surprise him, surpassing what he had hoped to achieve in a particular
That's
scene.
so interesting.
I mean, if you look at I think one of the great scenes in Seven Samurai is the burning mill scene where Mifune is waist deep in a stream holding a baby, and the mill is burning on one side to him, and he basically has a nervous breakdown in the middle of it. And it's the kind of scene that I think a lot of Japanese leading men of the 1950s wouldn't even do. They would refuse to do that kind of scene because it, exposes too much raw emotion that just was very unusual in Japanese films at that time.
Yeah, and that's the key word with that character throughout Seven Samurai is emotion, because Kikuchiyo is just driven by a gamut of different feelings, and obviously he's got aspirations. He's trying to live up to a standard. He's trying to gain some glory. But he's also incredibly brave.
Yeah.
And you just see how Mifune imbues that character with, you have to assume so much of his own personality. And I know nothing about the man, but I just have a trust that a lot of his own self shines through that character.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the key word, is that he exposed a lot of his own feelings, and I think he was kind of throughout his life, even into his old age, somewhat insecure. And I think in Kurosawa's films, he often shows that, or, in other films does just the opposite. I mean, in Yojimbo and Sanjuro, it's a lot of bravado.
Right.
And
Yeah,
everything.
he can turn on a different button depending on the film.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this was kind of a turning point in several ways for Kurosawa, but especially with new allegiance to, well, I mean, he had used Mifune several times before, but now he's on this streak with Mifune that goes for quite a while, but uses Shimura less. So he rode the wave with Mifune quite a while, but then very quickly, what soured that? Suddenly they stopped working together.
Well, I think everybody expects a simple answer. Like they were playing chess one day and got into a fight, and the chess pieces all flew up into the air. I'll never work with you again. Nothing like that ever happened. It was basically that there was some strain in their relationship on their last film together, Redbeard,
Yeah.
because it was so long in production. And when you did a Kurosawa movie, you couldn't go off and do other films in the meantime when you weren't needed. You were expected to be available all the time. And Redbeard took 2 years.
Ah, is that right?
And also, you have to understand that in Japan, it's one major difference between the Japanese film industry and Hollywood at that same time is that even top actors were not really well paid. A leading man in a typical Japanese movie, I think, probably got the equivalent of only $2,000 or $3,000 per film.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah. So in Mifune's case for Redbeard, he probably got, some bigger salary, but it was still probably like $10,000 or something.
Just such a shame that their partnership had to end because, of course, he had so much more to give. One of the last things I remember seeing him in was the TV version of Shogun, which is topical now because I don't know if you've seen the new version or it's still kind of being released episode by episode. But my wife and I have really enjoyed the FX adaptation of Shogun. But again, it's too bad that they couldn't continue working together.
Yeah, I think it's, the real explanation is they just gradually drifted apart over a period of about 15 years, and they went in different directions. Mifune in the 1960s formed his own production company and built his own studio that in order to keep it running, he had to have movies and television shows in production all the time. So he was having to accept work that he didn't necessarily want it to do, but he needed to keep people employed.
Yeah.
And, Kurosawa had his own problems with
that's right.
Tora 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 and Runaway Train, and then the financial failure of Dodeska Dan. So,
right. Yeah, it's interesting to trace the trajectory of both of their careers. And anyway, that's a podcast for another time. You can go down a whole rabbit hole there. So we are sending 70th birthday wishes to Seven Samurai. So, Stuart, what is Seven Samurai's greatest gift to viewers?
Well, I think it's just a film that keeps on giving. You can watch it over and over again, and it's always exciting. I mean, I know the film basically by heart because I've seen it so many times, and yet every time I see it, I get completely swept up in it.
It's incredible. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It doesn't get old. Yeah. So, and you always find something new to kind of grasp onto.
And I also think there are certain films that are basically audience proof in the sense that, younger people who are resistant to movies that are more than 10 years old or are in black and white or require reading English subtitles. Seven Samurai is a film you could kind of, if you could get somebody, force them to watch the movie, I think within about the first 45 minutes, they would be totally hooked. And by the end of the film, they'd be like, oh my God, this is such a great movie. I can't believe I've never watched it. I sort of, I know there's a new trend now on YouTube and elsewhere for these first time watch videos of people watching famous old movies for the first time.
I've not heard of this. What's that all about?
Well, the people look at things like Casablanca
You mean younger generations who wouldn't be privy to reaching out to that?
people typically in their teens and early 20s, and they do a side by side thing where they show clips from the
Okay, I
film.
know what you're talking about. Right. They're kind of picture in picture at the bottom of the
Right.
screen or something, and you'll see their reaction to a particular scene, and then
Yeah.
they'll comment. Got it.
And I'm sure there's stuff out there for Seven Samurai and other Kurosawa films, and I
Hmm.
haven't actually looked at any of those, but I think that there are lots of young people who I envy in the sense because they're going to discover these movies, including Seven Samurai for the first time, and I'm not worried that they're going to think, oh, this thing's kind of old and old fashioned and stuff. No, the movie is timeless.
Yeah, then just on that question, have you personally recommended this film to someone younger who came back to you and said, in a very rewarding fashion, in the way that you'd hoped, "Hey, that was a great call out. I appreciate that. I love
Oh
the
yeah,
movie for
no,
such and such." So does it still have legs among younger viewers that you've recommended it to?
like I say, it's pretty much audience proof. I think that it's a film like Casablanca is another one where, I mean, you can recommend it to somebody and it's guaranteed they will love it. I've never recommended Casablanca or Seven Samurai or a handful of other films to people and not have them totally love it. I understand why somebody might not respond all that favorably to something like Citizen Kane because it's a different kind of movie and it requires a kind of adjustment and things, but Seven Samurai works on such a basic level that it's almost impossible not to be completely swept up in it.
Well said, and totally agree. And that's to the merit, absolute merit of the movie and the filmmakers involved, everybody, because they kept it simple, but it's not dumbed down by any stretch. It's a film rich with subtexts and themes and plenty of different discussion points to talk about, as by virtue of our past discussion, the past 40 minutes. Completely simpatico with you on this, and I'll have to follow your lead here. I'll have to recommend it to more younger viewers.
Mm.
So, is there anything you're currently working on, Stuart, that you'd like listeners to know about? Is there a commentary in the works, a book? I know you're always doing film reviews. What else is going on?
Well, I'm currently in the midst of working on an audio commentary for Martin Scorsese's Silence, which is based on the famous Endo novel about Jesuit priests in I guess it's early 17th century Japan. And I just recently did, as part of that commentary, an interview with co-screenwriter Jay Cox, who was friends with Martin Scorsese, has been friends with Martin Scorsese for 55 years, roughly.
Wow, okay.
So there were a lot of great stories on that track coming
I'll
up.
bet. Is this going to be a Criterion edition?
No, this is for the imprint label out of Australia.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, because I know Silence has been out for quite a while, and I didn't recall if it was on a particular label. Very exciting. And when will that hit?
I believe the street date on that is end of June.
Fantastic. All right. Any other commentaries?
Not at the moment. I'm also right now, for anyone that happens to be in Japan during the month of April, I live in a farmhouse that architecturally is not all that different from the houses of the farmer peasants in Seven Samurai. It's an old Japanese farmhouse built in 1810, and
Wow.
it got working on it and restoring it got me interested in Minka architecture. Minka is the name of this particular style of old Japanese farmhouse.
Wow. Okay.
So I co-founded a group called Kominka Japan, and we're having a big Minka summit. So people that are interested in preservation of old Japanese farmhouses, foreigners and Japanese alike, we get together, and about 500 of us gather in Kyoto. So this year we're doing it in Kyoto on April 19th, 20th, and 21st. So anyone that's in Japan is welcome to come to this. So
timely. Wow, you're quite the Renaissance man.
yeah.
Tip of the hat to you, sir. And is there a website you want to send folks to learn more about that?
Sure. It's very simple. It's Kominka Japan, KOMINKA Japan, all one word .org.
Oh, that's simple enough. And we know you're still writing for Digital Bits, so you've got reviews that are constantly being posted there. Anything else we didn't mention yet?
No, that's more than enough.
You've got enough on your plate, right?
Now.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very kind of you to take some time to talk with me here. I know you have a very busy schedule right now, and I just want to give a shout out again to Stuart because, again, he found some window of time here to make it work, and so appreciative of it. It was really wonderful speaking with you at length about one of our shared favorite movies. And we will continue to look out for your film reviews, your commentaries, your books, and everything else you're involved in. So thanks again, Stuart.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
So glad I had a chance to get Stuart's insights and opinions for this installment. He's a guy who's long been on my guest wish list. Thanks again, Stuart. Did you know that Cineversary has its own website? That's right, we actually now have a vanity URL that's easy to remember, which will take you to a freshly designed portal where you can quickly access the latest episode of your favorite podcast, as well as all of our previous installments. Now it's a lot easier to spread the good word about our show to your friends and family. You simply tell them to visit Cineversary.com. Pretty simple, right? That's Cineversary.com. We also have a custom email address just for you. Now, if you ever want to share feedback on our show or offer suggestions for future installments, or maybe you just have a question about Cineversary, send it to us at cineversarypodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary show to your peeps. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us to get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, some of these other services, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that link, and leave a review and or rating. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Twitter. Our handle is @CineversaryPod, where you can easily tweet or follow us. And if you want to go an extra step in your support of our show and help keep us ad-free, please consider making a monetary donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate-cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, have you checked out my Cineverse Group website? Yeah, it's easy to get confused by these similar sounding names, Cineversary, Cineverse, Tomato. But Cineverse is actually the name of my private film discussion group I founded back in 2005 that continues to meet weekly on Zoom. Every week, the Cineverse group watches, researches, and discusses a different movie, and I create a summary write-up, call it a mini essay if you will, on that movie that gets posted to the Cineverse group blog. So if you want to enjoy reading in-depth content that examines different discussion-worthy motion pictures, including classic Hollywood films, independent features, foreign masterworks, modern movies, and silent-era standouts, then visit cineversegroup.com. It's simply spelled CINEVERSE group.com. Fun fact, every posted article on cineversegroup.com includes a link to a recording of our group discussion of that particular film, with me leading the conversation as moderator. So if you like what I'm doing on the Cineversary podcast, you might also want to give a listen to some of our Cineverse Group recordings, which are podcasts of a different sort. Again, head over to cineversegroup.com where you can check out some interesting text and audio content on a variety of films, not necessarily celebrating a milestone anniversary. They say Marlon Brando changed the game for film actors and infused a new realism in cinema with his captivating performances in the 1950s. It wasn't long, in fact, before he earned his first Best Actor Academy Award for a memorable film we will showcase in May. Join us next month as we honor yet another 70th anniversary, this time for On the Waterfront, directed by Elia Kazan, which made its theatrical debut in 1954. Until then, this is your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies because...
Like Kurosawa, I make mad films. Okay, I don't make films, but if I did, they'd have a samurai.
I couldn't resist. Thanks for giving us a listen.